We sell one that goes for $1,100. And what you get is a broadcast unit, and you get 4 units, and you can add more units to it as you go.
Okay.
And so sometimes what you get is a pretty inexpensive set of earbuds, but what some churches do is they say if you want fancier earbuds, you buy one. And then you use the little tap that picks up the signal. So it's called the Williams Personal Monitor System.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, come talk to me someday. We'll get you going. It's that time.
We're ready to go.
All right, sounds good. All right, we're going to call this meeting to order. Welcome to our new meeting room, our temporary meeting room here. Pretty fancy digs here. This is the November 20th meeting of the Brainerd Planning Commission. I'm looking for somebody to approve tonight's agenda or a motion.
So move.
Second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right, we have a couple minutes to look at. First is the regular meeting from 10:16. Looking for somebody to make a motion there, please.
So move.
Second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Passed. One more set of minutes to look at. That would be our workshop from 11:14. Looking for a motion.
So move.
Second.
Second, there we go. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We are ready for business. Our first item tonight would be item 4A. We're looking at a rezoning on a property at 7757 Wise Road, looking to move it from rural agriculture to R1A. I'm going to let our development director tell us a little bit about what we're looking at.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a rezoning, as you said, at 7757 Wise Road. They are looking to go from RA rural agriculture to R1 single family district, as I have up here, just kind of my report. The main purpose of this rezoning is to be able to reduce the required lot size so that they can split off a corner of the lot to have a separate lot that they could then build another house on. Specifically in this case, it's for a mother-in-law. Currently under the RA rural agricultural district, the minimum lot size is 40 acres, and this is a 40 acre, or I should say, the minimum lot size is 20 acres. This is a 40 acre lot, but dividing this lot up into another 20 acre lot really isn't how it's set up feasible. Much of the lot to the south is wetland, and where the current structure is, it's kind of smack dab in the middle of the lot, so it really doesn't go well to split another 20 acre lot off. The properties immediately adjacent, as you can see, are either RA rural agricultural or RR rural residential. The closest non-rural residentially zoned properties are R1A, so they would be in a similarly zoned area. Again, per the code, in R1A, the minimum lot size there is a 10,000 square foot lot. And then the plan here that the Webergs have is, upon approval of this rezoning, is to then submit a lot split request to split off a 200-foot by 600-foot piece of land. I believe that survey is in your packet, to then put that new home on. And they do have a request pending with Crow Wing County Highway Department to create a separate access off of Wise Road.
Very good. Any questions for David?
Mr. Chair, one question for staff. I see this property is not adjacent to any other property zoned R1A, so would it be feasible or possible to rezone it to rural residential, which is, there's similar property located that to the north, and then split it as a rural residential parcel? Or do you know what the minimum lot size is offhand for?
I don't know off the hand, but what I will say, one of the future things they are also doing, looking at the lot, right now they're looking to, part of the deal is why they chose R1A after meeting with me. They didn't put it in here. They're doing an immediate lot split for one home. In the future, they do intend to split off another section of that lot for for another family member. They're trying to keep in the family, trying to bring in, from what I understand, eventually both mothers on. And that's one reason why they want to do that, so they'll be able to eventually get a second lot out of it into the future, but that's just not in the immediate plan.
Any other questions? Hearing no other questions, we're going to open a public hearing. I don't have a clock to look at, but I bet we're opening a public hearing at 6:05. Oh, right there.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right. If anybody would like to speak on this matter, please come forward, especially the applicant. If the applicant is in, we'd love to hear from you. Come on up.
I'm actually here.
Come on up.
My
My husband is the one that applied, but he's late tonight, so I just would,
I should say real quick, your name and address, please?
it's Aaron Weberg, 7757 Wise Road, that's Brainerd, Minnesota, 56401. And everything that David stated is correct. We intend to build one single-family home for my mom, a patio-style home in one corner, and then the same on the other for Zach's mom once she retires. So that's the plan, and we think, Zach thinks after speaking with David that the residential, lost the word, rezone that he's asking for is going to be the best bet to cover both. So that's really all I have to add.
Very good, thank you so much. All right. Would anybody else like to come forth? All right, seeing nobody else and seeing where my clock is now, we'll close the public hearing at 6:05. Any discussion?
I guess my only point is if we rezone this entire 40-acre parcel, they could, potentially come in with a higher density residential development. And I think that area of the city is intended to be more rural residential, like the surrounding zoning classifications and the existing classification of the property. So just kind of keep that in mind. Can we find out what the minimum lot size is for
Yeah, I'm
rural
trying to look
res?
at it.
Because I think we,
And now that we think about it, I think, off the top of my head, I believe it's 20,000 square feet
for rural
for
residential?
rural residential, but I'm gonna double check that right now.
Okay.
While David's checking, any other comments?
Okay.
Thoughts? Quick question I would have, maybe I can have you multitask here, David, is that what's our estimate on how much of this land is actually buildable?
Of the 40, my guess would be probably no more than 25. I say the good southern half of this lot is pretty much wetland.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I am almost there. Rural, look at rural residential. Once this opens up. And, yes, minimum lot size, in a rural residential is 20,000 square feet, and it also has a maximum lot size of 1 acre. So not only do we have a minimum there, we also have a maximum, so that's also why I'm concerned that because of that maximum, it might be, they're looking at a 200 by 600 split is what they're gonna be proposing should this zoning go through, and I think that's a little over an acre.
So is 200 by 600, 1,200 square feet would we be looking at, or 12,000 square feet?
That would be 12,000
Oh,
square feet.
12,000 square feet, okay.
Let me double check, too, actually,
It's 120, so it's
120,000 square feet.
almost
120.
3 acres. yeah.
Okay,
Acres, yeah,
That's
so-
odd that there's a max.
Yeah, it's odd, it's the only, to my knowledge, it's the only zoning that has a maximum,
all right.
so.
Any other, if there's, if not any other discussion, would somebody feel like making a
Chair?
motion here? Do we have, yes,
Motion to approve the zoning request
Second.
to 1A.
second? Good.
Second.
Any discussion on that motion? All right. Hearing no further discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right. We have passed that, and I'm going to let David kind of explain what the next step is going to
And then
be.
Aaron, so with the rezoning request, that's a change to the ordinance. So this will so it'll have to go to 2 different council meetings. So it'll have a first reading on December 2nd, and then its final reading on December 16th. You're welcome.
Very good. That brings us to 4B. And this is a rezoning application that we're kind of revisiting here. This is 317 North 4th Street. And we had looked at, I think we initially began to look at a variance, and now it's come back as a zoning change on it. And so I'm going to let David tell us a little bit about it.
Yes, Mr. Chair, again, this came before us last month, and it was originally as a variance request, but upon review, it really determined that it really didn't fit actually the criteria for a variance, and it was better to come back as a rezoning request. So with Mr. Kramer, and it has now come back as a rezoning request. Here, we're looking for a zoning change from R1 single-family residential to R2 medium-density residential. As I kind of put here, some of my findings of fact, again, this is an R1. However, when you look at this block on the 300 block of, I think I have it in here, of 4th Street, and I have the map. Here we go. You'll see here is 317, and then just go just a block, a couple lots down, you got a B1 area, that building right there, that's the Fine Line Salon, and then just across the street, that is an R3 district. So this is kind of an area that does have a mix of zonings. So it's not a R1 that's only in an R1 area. There's a little mix in there. So additionally, in my review, obviously the reason that this needs to come to rezoning is they're looking to make this single-family home into a duplex. That's the core of this. In an R1 district, only detached single-family homes are allowed. There's a few other permitted uses, but in the crux of it is a duplex is not allowed in an R1 district. Interestingly, I think the Planning Commission has noted this before, is that the intent and purpose of an R1 district is not quite in harmony with the actual permitted uses, as it does say 1 and 2 family homes, yet in the permitted sections it only allows for single family. I know we've discussed that before. But looking at an R2, and I believe my section 4 there should be saying R2 district, you get single family and 2 family attached dwellings with units no more than 4 units. And I did look at the whole lot as a whole, and it does seem that this lot would remain conforming should it be moved to an R2 district. So there's nothing, it wouldn't become a non-conforming lot if it were to move to an R4 district. As we noticed before, we did have some parties come to speak last time. A number of people come and contact me regarding this prior to this meeting. I've put a couple letters that were submitted before you. We can talk about those and once we get to the public hearing. Final thing I just wanted to put in there, it doesn't really have an effect on, it shouldn't have an effect on the decision, but just note that this rezoning request, while if it is changed, it is still yet to be determined whether the structure itself will meet the requirements, and that'll have to be met at the stage where the applicant would submit a building permit to actually do the work necessary to divide up the property. So at that point, I'd just like to point out, my staff will not be able to determine that until an actual building permit is submitted.
All right.
Chair.
Yes, please.
May I ask a question, David? On the drawing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I see there is a proposed 2-car garage, which I'm assuming is not up there right now.
So that proposed 2-car garage is not there right now. It's a proposed future development. And so with this, it's not being considered here right now. With the rezoning, depending on if Mr. Kramer considered to continue to choose to pursue this, he may have to come back in the future for a variance, but we said at first, the main thing he's looking at right now is potentially being able to do a duplex. The garage is secondary. So we said we're gonna address the zoning first, and then we'll address the garage later. So in this situation, the garage it's proposed into the future, but not part of the request.
I guess the question I have, and I'm sorry I didn't look it up here, but the setbacks for going to R2 from an R1, how much difference are they?
I believe a setback goes from like 3 feet to 5 feet, so it's not
much.
huge.
Okay.
So, and that's not something that once should this be rezoned and he choose to go in the garage further, we would have to sit down and go into that detail as he looks to actually what he would want to do there, and then if he would have to change it at all or try to come back for that later on.
Okay.
Very good. Other questions for the director? Please.
If they go ahead with it, I know this is not, we're not approving a 2-car garage, but are they able to locate the parking from the rear of that property, or is it that the existing driveway and the only driveway that will be on the property?
Are you asking, could it go somewhere else? I guess I'm trying to look. Confused.
If I'm looking at it correctly, there's no back alleyway to have,
No, there is
to
no back
put
alley
the parking on
that
the rear of
lot.
the building?
No,
Okay.
on that block, there's no alley.
Cool. Any other questions?
Mr.
Please.
Chair, Mr. Chansky, I'm quickly trying to read through some of the items that were here submitted by, looks like a number of individuals on one, and then an independent submittal of, I think, pretty much the same general concerns, and then a handwritten. In there, I'm seeing some issues about maintenance, condition of sidewalks, junk cars and so forth. Are you aware of, has there been any enforcement action by the city on these issues? Have those been addressed?
I know my staff has addressed this property in the past. I know this property also has a lengthy history. Prior to the current owner owning it, from what I understand, I've heard from the current property owner as well as my staff, is that the previous owner was a hoarder. And so there were a lot of issues that kind of, I say, baggage that has come along with this property. I know my staff does try to address them as they come up. But I do not know of any current outstanding
That was my follow-up
issues
question. So
with the
you're not aware that there are any unresolved issues?
not to
or-
my knowledge.
Okay, thank you.
David, do we know when this property last changed hands?
I would have to look up the tax records, and Mr. Kramer could speak to that when he purchased it.
Find out that later. Yeah, I'm curious about that. All right. Any other questions before we start a hearing here?
I guess the only thing we were talking, Teresa brought up about parking, Mr. Chair. And I do see that as one of the issues on the neighbors was about the parking. That really, does this have, is it pertinent to this discussion at all about the parking?
I think that's a really good point.
It is a good point. From what I've evaluated from the property, it does have that narrow driveway. But when you look at our parking requirements, it would have the space to park the required amount of vehicles on there. Our parking requirement doesn't go into extent of necessary maneuverability. So even if the cars had to be single file, technically they would meet ordinance. And I know that's another reason why Mr. Kramer is looking to build that garage in the future should the rezoning go through. But as it stands now, they would be able to get the required amount of vehicles onto the property.
All right. Yes, please.
I have two more questions. Is this property currently licensed as a rental with the city of Brainerd? And are there currently any violations against this property that are being addressed?
I believe currently a family member of Mr. Kramer's lives in it, so it is not licensed because it doesn't necessarily need to be. As long as our code requires that if an immediate family member in a list that lives in the property does not have to be licensed. And I believe right now his daughter currently lives in the property. And then what was the second question?
Are there currently any violations against the property?
None to my knowledge.
Okay. If this were to be licensed as a duplex, or if this were to be turned into a duplex, and both units were rented by family members, would there be any rental licenses required?
No. Is assuming that when it is a immediate family member being a father, mother, grandparent, spouse, I think a child or grandchild.
Okay.
If it were to be, if others outside of the family were to live there, it would be licensed. It would be then subject to regular inspections internally and externally as well.
I think looking at the letters and the information that we have received from, it looks pretty close to every neighbor within the area. They're concerned that there would be renters that are not licensed and not inspected, and perhaps the inspections and the rental licensing would alleviate some of those issues for the neighboring residents and address their concerns.
I can see that. I don't know if that's really a question in front of us, but I can see
No,
your
it's
point of
not.
view.
Yeah.
I understand your point of view. Sure. Any other questions? If not, I'm going to open a public hearing at 6:19 is what I'm looking at. I certainly would invite the applicant, if the applicant would like to approach and. And your name and address when you're ready.
Jeff Kramer, 505 Rosewood Street. And I am not opposed to licensing this property. That's a pretty insignificant thing, in my opinion. And as far as the maintenance issues, I have intentions of doing some substantial improvements to this property, and at quite a cost. And going to a duplex is a method of recovering the costs. So my purpose is to move forward and improve that property significantly, and I'm pretty sure that the neighbors will appreciate what I intend to do. So whether it's family or not family, I don't object to getting a license. I have other rentals in Brainerd that I have licensed and dealt with the inspectors on.
Mr. Kramer,
I don't have a problem with
how
that.
long have you owned this property now?
Well, actually, the property is owned by my brother.
Okay,
He's had it since 2012.
okay.
So and my daughter has lived there for six and a half, 7 years, since 2012. So,
Very good. Any other questions for Mr. Kramer? If not, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Thank you. Anybody else like to address the board?
Hi, Sue Beck, 312 Juniper Street. My property abuts the property in question. And I think you have a list of some of the concerns that I submitted in the email. Same thing is referenced in the petition from the neighbors. But I would argue one of my concerns is that the property for 6.5, 7 years has not been improved, that it is loaded with junk. There are windows pulled away, there's paint peeling. The place has been a disaster for the entire time that there's been the current ownership there. And I think our concern is that the idea is to have a quiet neighborhood, to have it fit into the North Side area. And I have grave concerns that what we have now is going to be exacerbated by putting it into a duplex, and that it will not fit in with the one-family dwellings that we have now. I think history has proven this is not a good property, and I don't want to make things worse. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carter Keene, 302 Juniper in Brainerd, 56401. Can you roll back to your comments before, please? Or your recommendations? Where you say, no, up. No, up.
I think the last point.
Staff opinion. Where you say in that last sentence, staff cannot determine, excuse me, whether the structure itself will meet the building code requirements for a two-family dwelling. Why is that a question now? Why can't you answer that question before you take a vote on this kind of a rezoning?
Because when it comes to a rezoning, we're looking at just how the zoning is used, not necessarily, when you get to a zoning, it's a permittable use. A single family is still permitted in that zoning. And so if they rezone it and it still can't be turned to duplex, a single family is still allowed. And I also cannot determine that until a building permit has been submitted, and a building permit can't really be submitted right now because it's not in the correct zoning.
Well, so if you approve all this and it doesn't meet the code requirements of a two-family dwelling, what happens then?
It stays as a single-family dwelling.
Or,
So before you vote on this, shouldn't you determine that?
I think that's something we'll probably talk about.
Yeah. And I live on 302 Juniper, like I said, and I just see a creep happening in the neighborhood. If this occurs and it goes to a two-family house, I think across the street, those homes just north of Waleen's house might be tempted to go to a duplex too. And it's changing the face of the neighborhood, and I don't want to see that happen. I don't want my property values to go down because somebody wants to make more money on their property. And putting a different zoning in there, I mean, it's difficult enough in that area, being close to Kingwood and all the different zoning changes that have occurred along that route, and having a commercial establishment just south of us. I feel fortunate that we have the single families in the area that we do, and I would just not like to see it go to a two-family place. And I really think it's like the last time we were here, there was some kind of legal question that was not answered before, so we had to postpone it until now. I feel the same way about this building requirements for two-family dwelling. I don't know why we're standing here doing this. So until that question's answered too. If that question's answered, then I think people can vote with all the information. But so I don't agree with the zoning change. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Fred Kahn, and I'm at 324 Juniper Street. Our property, our house with a very short backyard, borders on this property. I have some concerns when I look at the size of the house, and a lot of questions. Can that present structure be reconfigured into two-family with extra bathrooms and kitchens and all that kind of stuff? And is the property big enough to support a larger unit, if so required by building permit? Also, the very close driveway to our property. The garage, there may be room for a two-car garage, but again, you have the issue of, what do they call
Setbacks.
the setbacks and so on. Over and above what Carter mentioned, what it does to the neighborhood. I'm right next door. And I've sent you 10 pictures with a request from the neighborhood members. Those pictures show you structurally there are many issues. And again, the question would be, is in 7 years, nothing has been done. I could go into many details as to burning garbage in the backyard and so on. Now, that's not part of this. But I question whether that property, after nothing has been done for 7 years, is going to be improved and maybe renewed by making it a duplex. But the maintenance of that property is a disaster. The neighbor, Sue Beck, had to put up a fence. It was terrible. First thing I did when we bought our property, when Bonnie Johnson used to live there, we did put up a fence. Anyway, I object to the rezoning. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. Do we have anybody else? All right. Seeing no other comers, I will close the public hearing at 6:28. Discussion?
Do we need a motion first, or we talk about it?
Well, I think we can talk about it.
Okay,
and
let's
then,
talk, yeah.
Unless somebody's raring to go with the motion.
Yeah.
I'd like to see the photos when they get down here.
Yeah, we'll pass them right along.
So, Mr. Chair, a question for staff. Violations are on a complaint-driven basis, right? We don't drive around looking for them, because judging from those photos, it appears that it's in violation. This property would be of at least the property maintenance code, and we probably shouldn't accept an application. But I think if it's not on any list,
Yes, so outside of sometimes in the summer months, we'll have an intern. Our property, especially when it comes to property maintenance, it's purely generally complaint driven. And my staff has been very good at addressing complaints when they are received, assuming that they do meet the requirements set forth in the code as a violation. Unfortunately, there are times where, for example, a lot of times when people have things in the rear yard, and it's unfortunate for Ms. Beck that there might be, obviously that's in her view, but according to our codes, it's a lot of times if there's garbage in the rear yard, if I can't see it from the street, it can't be acted upon. A lot of ways the rear yard of properties is kind of generally held kind of as that place where you can put things, assuming that it's not being visible necessarily from the street. My staff has a restriction that when they're going and doing inspections and stuff, they only can obviously look at things that they can see from essentially public right away. So there's no alley. They can't get back there. If they can't see it from the street, they can't get to it. And our staff is very good at when they do see things of getting it and trying to get addressing it and getting it addressed quickly.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
Just a question for David too, and this is some of these concerns, if it was a duplex, you at your department could go in without that restriction of sidewalk only, correct?
Correct. If it's a duplex and if it's and then therefore then licensed, yes, my staff would then, per the requirements of the rental license, would have access to the property.
Very good. Any other discussion, any other points?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to be voting in opposition to this rezoning request. It's a very small parcel. It's surrounded by all properties owned R1. I think I said maybe last year that I think that in the R1 zone, we should allow duplexes as a permitted use. So I would prefer to amend the ordinance to allow this sort of use as opposed to rezoning a very small property surrounded by R1 property. So I'll be voting against the rezoning request.
Would you like to make a motion?
No.
All right.
We hear
We
more
just, we have
discussion.
to wait for
Yep.
Teresa to hear.
Ms. Woodward? Any thoughts?
I believe I agree with you. So,
All right, very good.
yeah.
Any other discussion before somebody would like to offer a motion?
Mr. Chair, and maybe to visit the new comprehensive plan under land use. Goal 1 is to support mixed-use development that is focused on integration instead of the separation of land uses. Policy 1, deploy smart growth principles. There is a list of those. One of those is to create a range of housing opportunities and choices. So, as I'm trying to absorb, what the request is, looking at our new comp plan, which I don't have a hand copy that I can touch, so I fumble through these electronic versions at the moment. It seems like the request is compatible. Commissioner Bursley's point about the size of the lot is, to me, a mitigating point to think about. Does the lot actually allow you to have that multifamily use on that size of and such? I presume you could maybe go upward in that house and remain the same footprint and be able to then still have room for parking. I can think of ways that, but without a building permit or a plan, it's hard to say how the applicant intends to use that, but we're really deciding about the use, and I'm caught a little bit in thinking about the new comp plan. In my reading, seems to support this kind of a request.
Very good.
Mr. Chair,
Please.
Thanks, Mike, for getting that, but these concerns, as I mentioned, asked David, the concerns of the neighbors would be addressed if we did rezone this, because we would be able to make sure it gets cleaned up. They would not be facing this condition. Having said that, pardon me? I said, what I said is, this would be addressed if we had it. The concerns of the neighbors of the condition would be mitigated if we had that license, because the city could then go on the property and address these concerns of the car, the conditions, because they can go on the property as a rental, where you cannot do that as an ownership like the house is now. But having said that, I would like to see the comp plan, our new comp plan. I would like to see a copy and be able to read it before I really address this right now. I think I would really like to postpone it until we get that hard copy.
Okay?
That's what I would like to do.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
for what
please.
it's worth, the comp plan that we're working on that was recently adopted does not include a future land use map. So we're working off of our previous future land use map, which identifies the subject property as low to medium density residential, which would not be consistent with, or rezoning would not be consistent with our existing comp plan, future land use map. So I get where Commissioner Duval is coming from. I would like to see this handled through a zoning text amendment where we allow two-family dwellings in the R1 zone, which would then be consistent with the comp plan.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I should have added, and I do agree, I do think we do need to look at our basis of how we are going to do our. So I think there's a couple things that we need to look at before we
I
really
think
can
there's
make
a
a
few,
decision.
yeah, there are a few issues here. I think multifamily housing is part of the north side. It's always been part of the north side. And so I'm not opposed to it on that ground. I do find it hard to wrap my mind around how you get a duplex in that small piece of property. And I do think it's important to look at our new comp plan and to be, make sure we're in harmony with the intent of the comp plan. Other discussion?
Back on what I said before for Mr. Chansky, if it's approved to be a duplex, they come up with a plan to remodel it into a duplex. If it stays with family members and is not a licensed rental, because it's a duplex property, does that still give the city permission to go on there to be able to cite infractions?
Being purely a duplex doesn't give us necessarily access to the property. For example, if it's a duplex and they've got two children living in it, one in each unit, then it doesn't have to be licensed, so we don't have that right. If it's licensed, then that's where those extra, we're gonna inspect it and things like that come into play. Is the key there is a license. Now, if it's a duplex, it's not licensed, and it doesn't have family members, there's people living in that aren't immediate family members, well, then it's non-conforming and it's just straight up against the code. And then at that point, we'd be addressing it administratively to get that into compliance.
Mr. Chair, I'm willing to make a motion.
All right.
Unless we have more discussion.
I think we're ready for a motion.
What I'd like to do is to deny this rezoning request for 317 North 4th to convert from R1 to R2. I would like to deny that request at this time. I would like to further review with the comp plan and looking at some zoning text. I know it's in the works, but let's see if we can look at it a little bit better before, and then it always can come back to us. So that's my motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll second for discussion.
All right, we have a motion, we have a second. Discussion?
If we may, to the motioner, could we add a couple findings to that motion stating, number one, that the rezoning request is not consistent with the future land use map, and number two, that the proposed R2 classification is not adjacent to any other R2 properties. So in other words, it's not adjacent to.
I'm fine with those additions.
Okay.
All right, couple friendly amendments. Mr.
Commissioner
Duval?
Bursey, can you repeat this the second?
Yeah, so basically, the property is not adjacent to any other property zoned R2.
Thank you.
Commissioner Duval?
Maybe just a procedural question. Would the appropriate approach here be to simply table until the next meeting?
I just would like to point out, I think, first of all, is just a reminder of the 60-day rule. So we could table, we would have the time to do that, but the planning commission absolutely would have to make do an action next time. Just remember that at this point, the clock is ticking.
Very good.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
Mr.
please.
Duval, I guess I would prefer us not to table, but have it come back, if we could have it come back to us by the end of the year, to give us an opportunity to review what the concerns we had. Was that possible, David?
By the end of the year, we only have one meeting left.
Oh, we only have one. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, clock is ticking.
So if we deny it, it stops the clock, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
And there would have to be a new later.
Pardon me?
Yeah, if you didn't deny now, there'd have to be a new application later.
Yes.
And also, if you deny now, just I think, obviously, the planning commission has the decision, if it wants to come back later, to rehear it. But I guess my encouragement would be, if you deny now, you definitely want to make sure we're doing some kind of evaluation, because if you bring it back, the kind of idea is, well, if you deny it now, and they bring it back later, why would you not deny it? So there's something would have to change between now and later, that why you'd want to
Have it come back.
approve it.
I think that mechanism would be a text amendment or something like that.
Text amendment.
Exactly, so
And the
that's
comp
what I'm
plan,
getting to,
so-
they're making
Okay.
sure.
No, no,
Okay.
it wouldn't require a rezone if there was a text amendment, because it would be an
Correct.
allowed use.
Okay.
All
But I
right.
still think that the nuisance things need to be addressed, for sure. So I'm ready to vote.
All right, very good.
I don't have to change my
I'll
motion, guys?
No, just
Okay.
you amended it, and I'll second the
Do we have a
amendment.
second? Very good. Hearing no other discussion, am I correct? Are we done with discussion? All right. All in favor of the denial, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
All right, there we have it. 5-1. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate everybody coming out tonight. All right, we are rolling along. We have a conditional use permit now looking for Lowell Elementary School. I think we're going to pause maybe a few seconds here and let the Minnesota goodbye.
I have your plans up front if you want them. We didn't have them in the packet. I'll pull up electronic versions if you want. But
Need a couple of tweaks, so we can look at too.
Very good. All right, we are looking at, we have 3 different conditional use permits that we're going to look at tonight. The first one will be for Lowell Elementary School. And we have all sorts of fancy maps and descriptions and whatnot. Very good. Where our development director went. There he is. Would you like to give us a little introduction here?
yes, I'll do an introduction, then I'll pull up these files. Okay, so this is CUP number 3 for ISD 181 this year. So this is for a conditional use permit for Lowell Elementary School. That's at 704 3rd Avenue Northeast. This is again part of the ISD 181 referendum to improve the schools within the school district. In this situation with Lowell Elementary School, what some of the additions and improvements are including, but not limited to classrooms, kitchen, gym, and parking lot. Again, this is in an R1 single-family residential district. Per the code, a public school is a conditional use within that district. So that's why they're coming forward as a CUP. Within that section, there are 5 main criteria. The site is an access to a major collector. The site is landscaped according to Section 20. Off-street parking is provided according to Section 22. Off-street loading and service entrances are provided for Section 23, and then emergency vehicle access is provided to and within the site. What you have been provided with is a photometric plan incorporating lighting standards that were previously discussed to the other CUPs. On this, and we'll pull up these slides shortly, the school district has requested that the city engineer designate a section of G Street between 3rd and 4th Avenues as a one-way flowing east to west. Part of that is, that's the section where the new parking lot will be, where a lot of people will be walking, so it's kind of calm traffic in that area by changing that one street to a one-way. They have also asked, I think pretty much they received approval from the city engineer to stripe the east curb of the 3rd Avenue between H and G Street as bus parking drop-off. And the ISD 181 does, I think, now own all these properties associated with this project. So with that, that's all I have.
Questions for David before we start a hearing? My question would be, you talked about the photometric standards of Harrison and the high school. They were kind of different. Which ones are we kind of, is it going to be like the Harrison or is it going to be like the high school? 'Cause the high school had higher lights than Harrison did.
So, and we can get to that.
Sure.
Tim, which one do you want me, 1911 or 1910?
Yeah, do the November dated ones.
November dated
That's our
ones.
most current.
Oops, I don't like to open it that way. I'm going to pull these up. So these, the lighting standards they're looking at is within, I believe, the 13-foot standard.
13?
Yes.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, in all the applications before you tonight, we have the 13-foot
Okay.
light standards because we're adjacent to residential.
All right. I think we'll open a public hearing, so we can go a little further here. We'll open the public hearing at 6:46. And we have the applicant in front of us, and if you'd like to give us a little introduction to the changes you're looking at here, that'd be great.
Tim, is there a certain page you would prefer them to be looking at right now?
You could probably go to the site plan 5, sheet 5.
5? Okay. And then we'll just get rid of these sidewires. And we can zoom in a little bit.
All right, just to highlight a few of the building improvements here. I know it's already been run through quickly, and I'll do that quick myself. So there's the addition of the gym, an interior renovation, and then a parking lot to the south, as you can see on the screen there. Two quick things that I'd like to point out. As our team has continued to develop drawings and find the most efficient way to manage these buildings, we did make a change to the curb profile on the east end. It's a surmountable curb instead of your typical curb.
Adjacent to the on the parking lot itself.
Yep, on the parking lot, yeah, excuse me.
On the
So, yep, if you
east
head
and west ends, yep.
to the top, yeah, right there, yep.
Right there.
And that's to allow for snow removal, so we don't break curbs while we're trying to do that. The other requested change is a adjustment to the entry stairway. So if you go right to the, yep, right there. Before that was two separate stair sections with a landing in the middle, which would have made removal of that about 10-foot section would have had to be done by hand. And cost a lot of time to try and, for the maintenance crew to be able to do. So they requested that we combine the stairs and make that a little more user-friendly. Other than that, Tim, I'll turn it over to you to let you dive through civil.
Yeah, and to address, the points that David brought up, the request for the one-way is essentially, it's a major safety concern, is these schools operate in these neighborhoods currently, and we wanted to maintain that. And with that, then we're changing the functionality a little bit with regard to the bus drop-off and parent drop-off and pickup. So in this location where we're asking for the one-way, that's going to be the parent drop-off pickup areas. We're trying to limit, we didn't want to see two-way traffic so that we've got students crossing traffic to get to the school. So that's the intent of the one-way. And we've dealt through this through a fairly rigorous process as we were discussing parking standards and whatnot with the city. So this is the same concept we had talked back with the city council in December. Was it December? It's been a year already, hasn't it? Yeah, it's been a year already, so it's the same concept that we've been discussing with the council at that point, so.
We have a question here.
Where is your, the bus drop-off?
That is on the west side.
Oh, I'm
Hide
sorry.
behind your keyboard.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and so what we propose with the bus drop-off is currently the sidewalk is offset from the back of the curb by like 3 or 4 feet. The intent is we want to pull that sidewalk right to the back of the curb so that the students are stepping off on concrete rather than grass. So that'll be a change along 3rd Avenue. And then with regard to the front entry, that is now going to be on the south side of the building. So we have to get ADA compliance, so that's why we've got the 2 long sidewalks going at kind of an angular shape so that we can meet slope, because the school is quite a bit higher than the surrounding road surfaces. And then we did not promote any mid-crossings for pedestrians on G Street because we wanted to make sure that they're using the reduced width at the intersection. So that was the rationale. We had that conversation with the city engineer as well. So that's the intent, that we didn't provide any mid-crossings. So then there will be a revamping of the parking, or the playground area, the hard surface area, to accommodate the gym additions. And we had to change the location of the entry for snow removal for that hard surface area. Then we can maybe go to the landscape plan a little bit too, if you want to talk about
Mr.
that.
Chair,
at the
I
end.
asked him another question, one more question.
please.
I apologize, these pictures confuse me. So if we're going to be moving the bus stop off, we're going to get rid of that and go right up the sidewalk. That's going to allow the buses to get off the roadway. Do we have, you know what I'm saying? Are they going to be able to?
Is it right on the street?
We aren't going to change the geometry of the road, but that will allow the buses to pull up immediately adjacent to the curb, and then the kids will be able to step off right on sidewalk rather than dirt.
But I mean, the buses are going to be able to swing over a little bit. No.
So,
Oh, there's a
and that's
curb.
where I mentioned in my plan, one thing that they have proposed is to do a striping kind of right along here, next to the
Oh, that's
curb.
what you
That'll
meant by
be kind of
striping.
designated idea of this is bus drop-off. So there
Okay.
will be kind of a visual line of
Oh, thank
buses
you.
here, drive here.
Okay.
Yeah, I think this is a standard 35-foot width street, so that in lieu of allowing parking on the easterly side, that will be no parking, and then that'll be the staging area for the buses. So like
Okay.
you said, it'll allow the buses to get out of that major traffic lane.
Okay. Thank you for taking that.
You want to go to the landscape plan?
Yeah, and you can maybe even go to the blow-up of the parking lot area. That's probably one of the major concerns. So, because we are abutting residential properties, we are providing the screening adjacent to the properties. In this particular instance, we didn't have the screening immediately behind the curb, just because we have to have some sort of a stormwater component in here so that we try to maintain rates as they are today. And so we're using surface drainage in here. We didn't have the opportunity to put in pipe and storm sewer and catch basins. So we had to push the landscaping out to the property line. But it should still provide the screening that we need for the residential neighborhood. So I think that's kind of in a nutshell the
And one
site
thing I
stuff.
do also want to point out here is you can kind of see here, there is a existing alleyway, a city-maintained alleyway. So that's one of the reasons why this parking lot is kind of divided that way, is because access to and from the alleyway will remain.
And that's not going to be any issue, any concern then? Okay.
I was
No,
gonna
and that was a negotiation. Initially, we had shown that the parking lot was going to encompass that entire area. We were going to cut off the alley. At the request of the city engineer and the city attorney, we relooked at that. The request was to make sure that we maintain access, because garbage and snow removal becomes problematic, and they're trying to limit the amount of one-way alleys that you have in the city.
And additionally, to kind of also from the discussion that was also had on Harrison, specifically at the city council level, was also for obviously the garbage, the snowplow, and then also for emergency services as well, to be able to get back in there. When it comes to emergency services, they don't really like dead-end alleys.
So, David, is that going to become an issue with the way the alley was designed? Because I don't think it was designed to handle, a large amount of traffic on a daily basis. I would imagine people leaving that parking lot are going to use that alley to bypass the pickup and drop-off area there. So has there been any discussion on that, or do you see that being any sort of issue?
We haven't had any discussion on that. It hasn't been something that's been brought up as a major concern by myself or the city engineer.
Okay.
Again, that is the alley it is maintained by the city, so we grade it, we put fill in when necessary. So it is maintained by the city.
And I would say some of that's going to be, the educational component, just like we have to do with all the other schools. It's a substantial change. So the school district's been doing a great job of putting materials together to distribute to their parents so that they know how to use these things. And I would see this as a similar situation, that they would say, please do not use the alley. use it, the parent drop-off. The alley is dedicated for residents, and so then they would have to address it through those measures. And if it becomes problematic, then we'd have to look at it from the school side.
In addition, I believe, when we'll get to the discussion on the lighting here, obviously the alley's not lit. So when you look at trying to drive as me personally as a driver, especially if it's at night, I'm gonna be leaving, I'm not gonna go into the dark alley personally.
I would probably pick the fastest route, but,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, please.
following on Justin's, this is already being used for like the garbage trucks and everything? The alley is already being used that way?
Correct.
That is, so we don't have to have a concern about usage? Because they're
Already has
using
those
their,
size vehicles, yes, and
Okay.
it is plowed. So when it comes to exactly snow removal, obviously the city will still plow probably all the way through the alley, and then the school district would be responsible for the rest of the parking lot itself.
okay,
And you can see the homes that are immediately south, their garage is accessed off the alley, so you can see their driveways coming off that alley.
okay.
I have a quick question. The cars, do you envision the people who are using, who are going to be using these parking lots, where are they parking now? These people that are kind of parking on property, are they parking off-street?
They're parking on the streets.
Off-street? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, if you go over by Lowell and also Garfield during the school day, pretty much the entire four sides of both schools
Yeah.
are just lined with cars.
Got it. Very good.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
Tim, you mentioned you're planting along that south line of the parking lot. Difficult to read the key of what exactly you're planting there.
If you go to the
Do
next
you
page,
recall what it
Dave, it
is?
might show that. Well, that shows it. Do we have one more or not?
No, well, I've got, maybe it's this one? Is it this one, the detail?
No, it would be
It's
on
that,
that
it's that
previous
top,
one.
yeah, the
No,
key
this
at
is
the
the last,
top.
that's the last one I got. I've got a key up here I can try to zoom in on. Tim. Let's see. What we got? On the north, it looks like you're proposing a shade tree, northern pine oak. And then on the south,
The HC hedge cotton-easter. However you say that.
so,
Cotton-easter, cotton-easter,
a
cotoneaster.
coniferous
HC?
Austrian pine, it looks like. Coniferous Austrian pine, looks like. As well, coniferous offers, and then a boulevard, a shade tree.
So the ones along separating the parking lot from the properties are the ones that I'm keenly interested
Yeah,
in. I
that's
think
the
you're,
HC, that's a hedge.
it's a hedge.
Mhm.
Okay.
And this is, and we discussed this when staff met with them, and I believe their intention is to do essentially a very similar hedge as was agreed upon, I think, at the high school, kind of, that creates more of almost essentially a solid type wall.
Okay.
So to keep light from shining through.
And the school district has a maintenance group that does all that, I mean, it's, okay.
Cool.
Okay.
Let's continue.
Are there any architectural things we need to cover?
I can talk a little bit to the materials, I guess, in the building. Adam Barnett with GLG Architects. In terms of kind of the addition, size and materials, the front entry, the new entry on the south side of the building will be single story and is mostly brick masonry with a homogeneous color brick that matches one of the red bricks in kind of the patchwork of brick on the existing building. And then the gym addition, which is kind of the larger box you see towards the top, and then the box to the left of that, those will both be precast concrete. The gym is like a story and a half, so it's not overly tall. And then kind of the smaller box to the left of that of the addition is a 2.5-story classroom addition that will also be constructed out of precast concrete. And we paid special attention not to make that taller than the existing building. We're kind of tying those lines together. And the precast concrete that we've selected is a color and tone similar to the limestone accents on the existing building. So special thought into the materials and trying to match it into that existing building as much as possible. And again, keeping the scale down on the front to kind of help tie into the single-story, smaller residential homes in the area as well.
And those are probably in your packet, David, those elevations, if you need to see those. I didn't include, because those really didn't change from our original
No.
submittal.
There's no part of this building that's any taller than any other part of the existing building.
Very good.
Very nice.
Let you proceed here. Have you covered most of your points at this point? I know we'll be keenly interested in lighting, of course.
And did you have that? I have that, Tim. Did you have your your lighting plan?
No, the photometrics will be in the original.
Yep, and I can pull that up really quick. And we're on low, and we're gonna look at photometrics. Here we go. Whoops, that one open it up right. Here we go. And we can zoom in here. I'm not sure which one. You guys can see the foot candles, and then this document kind of gives you an idea of what maybe a little better here.
Just comment that that graphic is hugely helpful to interpret those
is.
numbers.
This one, yeah. We like this one. We like this
We
one.
like this one, thank you.
You know, as you can see on the new parking lot, they listed all the lights. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lights, all at 13 feet. And then some across the street at 13 feet. If you see the 17, 18 feet, I believe, Tim, correct me, those are building lights.
Those are on the building.
Those are on the
Yep.
building.
On the building? Okay.
So it's lower than the building.
We like that. Excellent.
This is very nice, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Reed worked with the electrical guys on that to get that, but this is a great graphic.
Yeah, that's very helpful.
Very nice.
Very cool. Mr. Chair.
Yes, please.
Can you comment on what the color of those lights are? Kelvin, do you know that?
I don't know.
Yeah.
This one or the first one, Reed?
Yep.
This one? Let me zoom out. Is it over here?
Off to the side, there was some fixture detail. And it may be on the next one where they have the schedule of fixtures on the next page.
Okay, page 2.
I had seen in there 3,000 K in one of your graphics, and I was just curious if, there it is there. Is that what,
Okay, sure. Yeah, that's the
Yep.
light bulb.
Yep, so that's the 3000 K, that's the color temperature, so it's a warm, little bit like the corner one up there.
all right,
Yeah, the
Right.
5,000
Warm
the
white.
5,000, those are more your bright white.
correct.
This is a little,
Yeah, so just trying to interpret, I saw that number and wasn't sure, whether that was just a model number or whether that was speaking to color.
That'll be the
Thank
color
you for
temperature of the
including
fixture,
that.
yep.
I don't want to jump ahead too much, but are these similar fixtures we'll see on the other two elementary schools? Similar? Okay.
this
That's
is probably similar to what we had at Harrison, right?
Yep, I
not
believe so,
big
yep.
changes.
Because that's one of the things with the school district, is we're trying to get consistency for maintenance purposes and
Sure.
things like that, so.
That helps me
That
understand it.
helps, yeah.
Thanks. Good.
What does these 000, the blue zeros mean?
Those are the foot candles. Those are the foot candles.
Oh, okay.
So that shows you that light is not emitting beyond the property line.
New
So that
fixtures,
zeros means that there's no light.
the new fixtures, yes.
Yes.
The new fixtures are not emitting light in any of those areas where there's zero.
Okay.
I like it.
Did this take into account the public light? Does not.
This does not take into account any street lighting
Your contribution.
or any of the
Just what
existing
you're
lights on the
putting in,
building
right,
that are
that's all.
not new.
Right, because if you zoom out, what you'll notice is there's a light at each intersection, so it doesn't have the photometrics for those.
But you guys are only responsible for the lights that you're putting in. You're not responsible for anybody else's. Okay.
Yeah, so currently on the corner, there's a street light on either one of these corners, and that's not being accounted for in this photometrics. So
Okay.
the photometrics provided here are only what's being provided by the school district as part of the construction project.
Perfect.
Fair enough.
Have we covered most of the points on this? Are there, we have plenty of other, things to cover before we're done here tonight. So my question would be, do you guys feel comfortable at this point that we understand what they're doing? Any other questions? Yes, please.
Mr. Chair, I do have one question regarding are there any signs, the good old Brainerd sign out there, and is that illuminated? Is that part of this plan, or do you have a comment on that, or?
So we've got some building signage.
Have that in this plan?
On the corner of the addition is, so down on this corner, we've got actually an accent material. It's a metal panel. It's blue. It's the same thing that's, again, standard on all the district buildings they're doing at the front entrances. And it's got the B circle logo up on the top, and actually on two sides, which is a little bit unlike some of the other schools. But the way this sits in the orientation with two streets there, we took advantage of that. I don't believe that is illuminated.
It is not illuminated?
It is not illuminated, nope. And then there's also some lettered signage that is not illuminated on the front either. That'll say Lowell Elementary.
And there's no freestanding signs that are off the building that are lighted.
Right, no monument signs or anything.
Thank you.
All right, if we're
Well,
comfortable with...
maybe one other thing we should point out too is here on the west side of the building, there's a dumpster enclosure, and so there's a fence that screens this area, and this is being put in at grade because this will have to be the delivery area for the kitchen. And so this will be a recessed area. There will be a retaining wall back here of around 4 foot in height.
Okay.
And that's just because, again, the school is about 5 feet higher than the surrounding streets.
Okay.
If we're comfortable with our questions on the staff, I would like to open this to any public comment, that anybody would like to come forth from the public and comment on the plan. I'd love to hear your input. Without that, David, is there anything that we should read into the record, any emails or any correspondence?
I received nothing. I did receive a number of calls, pretty much on all the conditional use permits over the last week or so, as people got their notifications, but for the most part, I didn't, once people were just looking at, wondering what was going on, once it was explained, I didn't get any negative comments. Most people thought, okay, that sounds good. No negative comments to report.
Okay. So if we're comfortable, I'm going to close the public hearing then at 8:06 or 7:06. Look at that clock there. And any discussion amongst the commission?
I'm ready to make a motion.
If you're ready, Jan, let's hear a motion.
I make a motion to recommend the approval of CUP application for the school district 181 on Lowell Elementary.
Second.
All right, we have a motion, we have a second. Any discussion?
I'm assuming that's based on staff findings. Sorry, I'm a stickler for that.
Fine, yes,
You are.
yes. That's good. Thank you
Add
for
in the record.
added it. I will do that amendment with the staff
But you
finding.
need to reapply, my friend. All right, very good. All right, hearing no other discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. We have passed the CUP for Lowell Elementary. We will roll on to a CUP for Garfield, and I'll let David tell us what he needs to tell us here.
Okay, so Garfield Elementary, still in the northeast Brainerd area, so a lot of it still stands, still in R1 district, therefore, this is a conditional use. Photometric plan has been provided to you. In this case, the school district is submitting a request to the city engineer to designate 4 on-street handicap parking spots along the south curb line of L Street between 10th Avenue Northeast, 11th Avenue Northeast. Part of this is to, one, reduce the necessary parking spots in their proposed new parking lot, and also, once we get to that site plan, you'll see where the front of the building is. I know they'll speak to this, and then where the parking lot is as well. There's kind of some distance, and so to also try to bring those handicap spots closer to the main entrance of the building. And at this point, I believe ISD 181 does own all the properties now? Okay.
Yes.
They own all the properties now.
Okay.
Again, a number of people contact, just wondering what was going on. No negative comments to report.
Very good. Any questions for David before we open the hearing? Hearing none, I will open a public hearing at 7:09 on the conditional use permit for Garfield. And I will let the district staff tell us a little bit about the plans.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. Just a recap of the work we have going on at Garfield. There are several additions going on to the building. We have two classroom addition, or a two classroom addition, an expansion of another classroom, some internal additions in a courtyard, and then a admin suite addition for the front entry and a kitchen addition, as well as the parking lot addition for the facility. David, when you have a chance, when you're pulling up photometrics too, I think it'd be helpful for the architectural. We have some of those front elevations that'll show some of the materials you guys were asking about before too. But that's the general overview of the project itself.
Very good. We want to start maybe on we're going to the lighting, or should we take a look at the new parking lot perhaps?
Yeah, let's start with the light. Why don't we start with the parking lot, like we kind of did last time?
All right.
Let's see, I'm trying to find, did you have that? Is that this one? Trying to find which one. What is your photometric for this one? Is this the photometric?
Well, if it's the lighting, we can do the
That's
lighting.
photometric,
We can do the
okay.
lighting first. Let's do the lighting first then.
Want to do the lighting first?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure I had the right file. Is this one landscaping?
I almost think it went by real
I
quick
think
in
this
the
is
beginning.
landscaping, actually.
Uh-huh.
Which one was the lighting? Do we have the lighting plan in this one, Tim?
Is that with the architectural?
That might be within the architecture. Let me double check here.
Should have been separate electrical. Yeah, there should be a separate electrical in there as well.
B?
Yeah, go back.
Okay, so this is the,
Span the titles there for a second.
this one?
That one, yep.
Okay, that one. Got it. You got it. There we go.
Okay.
So there
Can
we
you
go.
tell me which one's the front?
So this one down here will be the new
Front.
front.
Oh,
Okay.
Correct,
okay.
yep.
Is that the front currently, or is the front currently?
Yes, that's the front currently.
Okay,
Yep.
excellent, thank you.
So this is where, I'll just talk really quick, this is where down here, as you can see, the proposed 4 handicap spots. The reason it's 4 there is, as you can see, here's the new proposed parking lot and the front entrance. So they're just trying to get some closer to the front entrance.
Okay.
And there again, this is consistent with what was discussed with the city council a year ago. The parking lot originally was double that. I think we also extended into these properties here, but because of the willingness of those property owners, we ended up reducing to this. And so we had always planned on putting additional ADA stalls within the city right away to be adjacent to the front entry. Most recently, we did have a conversation with David and with Paul Sandy. There was some reservation or maybe concern about liability, but the intent is that there are a lot of grandparents and things like that that come to this school. And so we didn't want to relinquish a couple of stalls for ADA compliance. We feel that we need them in this particular instance. So we had left them in because, again, it's consistent with what we had discussed with the council about a year ago. So.
And I'll just share, so with that, Tim talked about concerns, specifically from the standpoint of engineer Sandy, of that once you're in the right-of-way, it kind of becomes responsibility of the city, and the concern is should there be slips, falls, potentially the city could be liable. But the direction we're going to be taking with this is engineer Sandy will be working with the school district essentially on an agreement that pretty much says anything in that area is the responsibility of the school district.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
Adding on that, are the city going to be responsible for the snow removal and that maintenance? Or
No,
is
the
that-
intention will be pretty much saying, even though that it's in our right-of-way, ISDA at 181 is going to accept responsibility, so, they'll pretty much plow a ridge when they plow, they'll just plow like normal, and then the school district will be responsible to come in here. And that agreement's is underway, kind of pending CUP, and then we'll pursue that type of agreement.
And it's gonna be something like 100 years?
Or whatever, you know.
I mean, it's gonna be something that we're
That'll
not
be
gonna have to
something
look,
Engineer Sandy will be handling and then working
but
with
it's
the
not
school.
something we're gonna have to look at every 10 years or
No,
something like that? Okay.
No. It'll probably be a perpetuity thing as long as they
Okay.
exist.
Okay.
But that'll be, Engineer Sandy will be handling that.
Cool. Can you tell us a little bit about the parking lot? Can we kind of look at that a little bit and see what the plans are?
Yeah, so again, because of the reluctance of the neighboring property owners and trying to minimize parking, this is the scenario that we have come up with. And so in order to be ADA compliant, we have to provide a couple of accessible stalls here. And those will be utilized by staff if we need, because the staff entry will be in this location here. And so those will be handy for that. And we are proposing a crossing here. Yeah, here. So that will be striped, and there will be curb ramps that will be installed here. We try to maximize this to the extent that we could, and we can get to the landscaping plan. It'll show you that we've got screening here because of the residential neighborhoods that are adjacent to us. And what you'll notice here is there is also a dumpster enclosure in this location, very similar to what we have at Lowell, where this is recessed. So this will be about 3 foot in height here. And then this entry needs to be ADA compliant, but that'll have to be through this route here. We can't make this ADA compliant because of the elevation difference again. So I think that's really what we're planning on parking. Again, we tried to maximize what we have.
I'll put the landscape here.
Mr. Duvall, any questions on the forestry?
Now, I do want to note one thing. Again, after meeting with district staff, we removed some trees in this, or shrubbery in this location.
Where?
Because
Oh,
that'll
there.
be our snow removal.
Okay.
So we have to make this easily maintainable by the district. So
Okay.
with shrubbery encompassing the whole thing, it was not really maintainable. So that's
And-
the
and
only
when-
change really from a landscape perspective.
And when Engineer Sandy and I met with staff, one thing we noticed is obviously, as you can see, how the parking stalls are angled. You really aren't going to have headlights facing this way unless they're pulling out. And then again, as I said, because of neighbors here, and the way this parking lot is set up, I believe they're planning to have these also surmountable, right, Reed?
Yes.
So then the plan is to put the snow here and here. Can't put it over here because of the sidewalks and walkways.
Right, and by ordinance, we don't need screening here and here because we abut city right away.
All right. Other questions?
Mr. Chair, just one quick one.
Please.
For Tim, it looks like you have a catch basin there and stormwater is going to the city storm sewer.
Yep, and we'll have to work with the city engineer to get approval for this. Garfield is probably the one where we might need a, what did he call it? An exemption or administrative exemption or something like that.
So is the reason you couldn't do it on the previous one because of capacity or grades or what?
This one, we just didn't have any room to do any kind of stormwater measures because of the unwilling property owners in this direction.
Okay.
It just took away any kind of land that we would have had available for doing a stormwater feature. We just don't have that in this location.
All right.
And what have, the crossing the street, what have we done with that? Is that vacated, or are you going in one way on where they're crossing? Is it a low-traffic street right there? Is it, you know what I'm saying, is it?
L.
I don't know the volumes on that road. We haven't done anything with regard to traffic volumes on this because this isn't a parent drop-off or anything. This is just going to be a standard city street.
Oh,
So
it's
this
just-
will just be for staff parking.
Oh, staff, okay.
And when we met, Engineer Sandy from traffic's concern, didn't seem to have any concerns
Okay.
with that crossing there.
Okay.
Are the bump outs being constructed or are those existing?
Those are
If you want to
existing.
call them, they are, okay.
Yep.
don't remember seeing those, all right.
Very good. Any other questions for the district staff? Yes, please?
I do. It's not very clear to me where the stormwater collection or drainage is going to be. Does any of this slope towards the neighboring properties?
No, what we have is this parking lot, the high point is all along the curb out here, and it all drains into this interior catch basin, which
Okay.
goes into the city storm sewer. So
Okay.
it does not drain on the neighboring property.
Very good. Other questions for the district staff? I'd like to take this moment to invite anybody from the public who would like to comment on this, please. This is your hearing too, if anybody has comment.
I would like to just bring
wanna-
back up one
which one
thing
do
I
you-
think that was asked, wasn't answered, and I'm gonna zoom out really quick. I think someone asked bus drop-off. Just want to remind people where the bus drop-off will be. Where the bus drop-off, I think it was asked earlier, I don't think it was answered. Go ahead. You wanna,
Yep.
you wanna come?
Hello.
Hi, I'm Jody Kennedy. I'm the principal at Garfield Elementary School. Thanks for letting us join you tonight. Our parking is currently in this whole front block. In the morning, we have 17 buses that come and visit us. They park, our special needs buses come closest to the front door. The remaining buses start parking here and they park all along 10th, and then they wrap around where you can't see the next street. Over here is J. And we have buses that line that whole side, and we have a bus or two that come on the back side here on 11th, where our parent pickup and drop off is also occurring. The buses that are on 11th and all of J are transfer buses. We are a transfer site currently. So those buses drop and go somewhere between 7:38 and 7:48. They drop off middle school, high school kids. All of our elementary kids come in, and then those buses leave immediately. And the remaining portion of the buses on the front side on 10th drop off the rest of the elementary kids, reload the high school and middle school kids, and then everybody's gone by about 7:55.
All right,
And,
please.
and Jody, you said the
Yep.
parent drop-off is going to be way up on the top.
Our parent pickup drop-off currently occurs on 11th. So there is parking, as someone said, on all streets that are available for parking currently. And then we have two-way traffic on this road also.
Right.
And then
But
we
you're gonna be
have,
on the school side is where the drop-off is.
yep, we have
Okay.
this is a very large sidewalk.
Okay.
Good half the distance of the length of that block, where
Okay.
the kids are unloaded onto asphalt or
Okay.
sidewalk.
Thank you.
And there's
Thank
no
you.
changes, you're operating that way today.
We are currently operating that way and have been for about 6 years.
All right,
The place that might get busy for us would be in here. If we still staff park here currently, I'm assuming they will be allowed to park moving forward with this project too.
So
The north
staff
side.
is going to have a
On the
parking-
north side.
Parking ramp, a parking lot, and going to be parking on the streets?
We currently have about 80 employees, and this lot, I believe, will allow for about 25 or 6
Okay.
parking spots. So we will still need
Mm-hmm.
parking for about 60 staff elsewhere around the perimeter.
And that was encouraged last December when we were visiting with the council. They wanted to
Right.
encourage parking in the neighborhood, so.
Yeah, I remember.
very good. All right, thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
All right.
Do we need to cover any architectural?
Do we want to just pull up the elevations? Just that kind of shows
Sure,
some of the
whatever else you
accent.
think we
Yep.
need to see here, please.
I know we referenced it on the last one, so we can.
Which one, which?
That was that architectural I had you pull up earlier. That wouldn't be on the civil set. You'd have to pull that other PDF up.
This one?
Nope,
Or
the other
The
PDF.
other PDF?
Yep.
So this PDF,
Nope, next one.
this one? No, this lady.
No,
I
no,
think
no.
it
I
was
don't know
this
if you
one.
opened that one. You saved it, I believe, but.
Wasn't it this one? Or what, oh, one of the ones I still
Yep,
had in
yep,
the
the
folder.
architectural, yep. Yep, the middle one.
This one?
Nope, should be the architectural there, yep.
That one? Okay.
Yep.
We'll get that one going real quick.
Boom.
So this is just a general floor plan, but this is what I wanted everybody to see. The highlighted areas in color are what is our finishes. I won't take Sarah's thunder. She's with Wold Architects, so I'll let her explain their design.
Please.
Thank you. Very similar to Lowell, throughout the district, we're trying to match and complement the existing building in scale and materials. So our additions are all one story to match the existing. Primarily they're brick, an orangey red brick to match the existing. You can see, gosh, in the top drawing over to the right, where we're, oh, thank you. Do I have to push the button? Right there. The existing classrooms along 10th Street right now have limestone and metal panels. So on our first grade addition, we're matching that so that it's going to look like one, continuous building. The rest of the additions are matching the existing with this orange brick. This is our new front entry and office addition. And in that location, we're adding a complementary accent brick color, a kind of a warm brown. And we also have, just like the other schools, where am I? Our blue branding pylon is what we're calling it. Every school is going to have this vertical blue element that this district logo will be on. Displayed on, and just like Lowell, it's very hard to see. Wow, I'm not very good at this. There's also, it's very hard to see in this drawing, but we also have dimensional letter signage there that will say Garfield Elementary.
Okay.
Excellent. Any other points you'd like to share with us on this CUP? Any other questions for the district staff? All right. And with that, I'll close the public hearing on this CUP at 7:26. Discussion? And or a motion?
I'll make a motion.
All right.
I make a motion to, I forgot. Recommend, thank you, the word recommend approval of the Garfield Elementary CUP with the finding of facts in the staff's report. And I so move.
I will second that motion.
All right. We have a motion, we have a second. Do we have any discussion or questions? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Hearing none. We have passed the CUP for Garfield School. All right, we are on to item E. This would be the Riverside School CUP. I think I'll maybe let David to give us a little introduction, and then we'll let the district staff settle in here.
We should have musical chairs right here.
Exactly.
So this is our final CUP that's going to come before us throughout this season. Yay for everybody. So this is Riverside Elementary, and this also happens to be kind of at least the least of the three things being done, of the schools that are being done here. So Riverside Elementary, this one is a little different. We're talking about west side of the river. This is an R3 high-density residential district. Still in residential district, still a conditional use with the same criteria as mentioned before. Only thing that's different here, one thing I did add, if you can visualize Riverside, and we'll put up some drawings in just a minute, that it does kind of right on the Mississippi River. We did review, and it does seem to meet all the shoreline management regulations set forth in Section 530 of the Code of Ordinances, so we're good there. And again, ISD 181 does own all the properties associated with this project, and I have not received any negative comments regarding this project to date.
All right. Any questions for the director before we open a public hearing?
Mr. Chair?
Please.
David, you're saying that there are no issues with the shoreland ordinance here with this property or this project? In other words, there is no activity within the setbacks or anything to that effect?
No. So we did as we did look into this, we wanted to make sure and double check those things because of some additions. as I'm pulling up drawings right here, as you can see, no further addition is really going in front of existing. You can see it kind of slightly goes in front, but where the bluff is and where the high water marks are, actually, this area is actually further back from the river than this area even is, and it does meet the required setbacks.
There's an existing fence that runs along the bluff line.
This is right here.
That's the existing fence?
That's the existing fence.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair,
Please.
And that's
so
pretty much the
that
top of the
southeast corner, any of the parking lot improvements and such are not encroaching on the bluff or are just improvements on the existing footprint?
It's improvements on the existing. There's no really true expansion.
Thank you.
All right. All right, I'm going to open a public hearing at 7:30, and I will let our applicant give us a little introduction and talk about some of the salient points.
Good evening, Mark Needham here with ICS Consulting. Just to reiterate a few things, it's an addition of a gym and then interior renovation of the space and then some repair and replacement of some failing pavement that's on site already. And then some additional landscaping out to the front with where the flagpole and all that and the entryway is. Other than that, I'll turn it over to Tim here to.
So what we have is, within the receiving area here is where a fair amount of changes are going to take place. What you see there today is they have dumpsters and garbage cans that are sitting there that aren't screened. And so we're going to add on in this location, and so that's going to change the functionality. I don't know why I can't get this to work. Change the functionality in here. So now, right now, the dumpsters and garbage cans sit in this location. The intent is to pull them out here and provide a fence for some screening, because currently there is no screening with regard to those dumpsters. So we're trying to improve the situation. We need to widen that out a little bit also because there is a retaining wall that's along here, and because of the deliveries, they're kind of cutting into this earthen bank. So the intent is we want to widen this out, make it more usable so that we avoid that cutting into the banks with the trucks. And with regard to the site, what we're going to do is we're going to mill and overlay this bituminous parking lot because it's getting to be in rough shape. We are going to add a little bit of bituminous, it's just because they park there now. So we want to make it, again, more functional. It'll be a better use in the long run. We're looking at trying to bid this as an alternative. If the construction bids come in favorable, we will look at milling and overlaying this bituminous and replacing this bituminous. And then what we have to do is we have to reconstruct the bituminous play area because that's currently about in this location where the addition is going. So then we have to push that out just a little bit to get a usable space for the district. So I think that's pretty much it for the site. And like Mark had alluded to, is we're replacing some of the bituminous. And we don't have to do any parking improvements, but we are replacing some bituminous here because it is in pretty bad condition.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, please.
somebody humor me, and where's the front entrance here so I get orientated?
Oops, the front entry is right here.
Right there.
Yep.
So
And
where
that will
you're,
remain.
okay, so where you were looking at doing the dumpsters, that is behind the school. Washington is this way, right?
Yeah, Washington is up here.
Up there.
Yep.
It's up here.
Washington is up here, yep. And
what
so,
is that from?
and this is the street, I don't know the name of the street, but this is the
Center
one
and
that goes up back
Charles.
out to Fourth.
This is Charles.
Yeah.
Oh, that's Charles right
Yep.
there? Okay, okay. I didn't realize they had dumpsters in there.
Yeah, they do.
I didn't know they had that. I didn't know that was dumpster area.
That receiving area is set significantly far back from kind of the front facade of the building.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
you really don't see
You
it.
kind of see where that existing link is between,
Yeah, right here.
Yeah.
kind of that 94 addition and the rest of the
So it's
building.
it's really screened by this building. This is
Oh,
the only
okay.
place you can see it is from Charles.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, so it's minimal. So the visibility is minimal. We're just
Okay.
trying to improve on that little bit of visibility.
Any other points you'd like to share with us on the changes?
I guess just to speak to the architecture as well on this one, in that receiving area that Tim mentioned right there, that is a single-story addition at or below the adjacent pieces And that will have a brick exterior, color selected to match the brick on the existing building. And then the portion on the playground side, that is where there's a gym addition. And again, we were inclined to match the height of their current gym multi-purpose space, so we're not going any taller. And much like the other school projects, that'll be in that precast concrete with kind of a limestone color that matches the limestone panels on the rest of the building. And then down here, oops, in that bottom right corner, that's the new entry. Again, it's not changing locations. If you're familiar now, there's kind of this low encroaching long canopy with steel and concrete, and the steel's rusting and it's kind of in disrepair. We're demolishing that, and we're going to have a new kind of shallower canopy that's integrated into the building architecture and not kind of this external element. And much like the other ones, you kind of see the B there, that's that blue pylon, and then there's some building lettering right over where you would walk under to get to the doors.
Very good. Any other, anything else you want us to, anything we're missing here, any other highlights?
Particular one, we really didn't have any screening or landscaping that was
Okay.
required by ordinance, but we are going to do some improvements at the front entry. So maybe if you want to look at the landscape plan just a little bit.
And the lighting is an issue here because you already did that.
Yeah, and we're not changing that, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so this just goes to show that we're trying to incorporate and implement some landscaping to try to, you know, beautify that entry a little bit. There will be a flagpole that'll be out here because the school is trying to instill with children that the principles behind raising and lowering flags and flag etiquette. So I think the intent is to try to leave that so it's a daily operation. So just trying to incorporate that with the front entry.
This gentleman looks pretty good. I'm just going to take this opportunity to kind of bring up one of my own pet projects and ideas, and that is access to the Mississippi River. That's something I've worked hard on in this community. I've tried to walk along that fence line. It's hard. It would be wonderful someday if the district would consider a trail that would run along there, be outside of the fence. You don't want to, people into the schoolyard, but just a thought. Just want to throw that out there as some idea. It's a beautiful view of the river. It's a view you don't see anywhere else. It's unique. So I'm just going to throw that idea out there and plant that. Maybe someday something good will happen on that. Anyhow, I'm off my soapbox there. And any other questions for staff? All right. Any member of the public that would like to opine, since I took my chance? All right. Not hearing that, I am going to close our public hearing then at 7:37. All right. Any discussion and/or motion?
Mr. Chair, I will make the
please.
motion to recommend approval of the conditional use permit for the modifications at Riverside Elementary, 205 West Washington Street, based on the staff findings of fact.
Of course.
I'll second that.
All right. Very good. All right. Any discussion?
All I wanted to say is I commend you guys and the school district for helping us realize our lighting and working with us. So I thank you very, very much.
I'll echo that. Thanks for putting up with this. We've learned a lot, and it's been a good experience working with you through these various CUPs. It's been a good experience. So.
Well, we thank you for your openness to work with us, and it appears as though you've heard our concerns, so it's
Oh, yeah.
nice to see that.
Very good. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. CUP is passed. And thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
All right. It's going to lead us to item 5. This would be our public forum. This is a chance for citizens to opine, I'll use that word again, on any matters not
Tell
on...
everybody they have to stay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
School's not out, guys.
exactly. This says no bell. All right. I'm opening our public forum at 7:38. I'm looking around. Mr. Fargo? No? Got nothing? All right. Not yet. Saving it up? Okay. All right. All right. I'm going to close our public hearing then at 7:39. There we go. This leads us to old business, and this would be 6A, be the first one. This would be a public hearing on a proposed lighting ordinance. We had which I thought was a pretty productive workshop last week, discussing this and trying to come up with a plan that was nuanced, that was sensitive to the concerns that we heard at the previous public hearing, that also still let us meet some of the goals that we had on this. I'll let David maybe tell us a little bit about, kind of summarize the ordinance.
Yep, so after the public hearing on the 16th, as the chair said, the commission met last Thursday in workshop to really try to look at the ordinance that was originally proposed, hear the concerns, and how can we make something that works a little better than what we have now, while also still being sensitive and welcoming to the entire community. So first of all, we have a couple, in this, there are a couple different changes. First of all, in section 58518-2, we added an E here. The reason we added this is because in a discussion for lighting, it was brought up that there really isn't any section of our lighting ordinance that actually addresses outdoor athletic facilities, which the issue with that becomes, it really comes up to translation as to whether are they exempt or are they then put under the requirements of regular outdoor lighting. And I guess that really depends on who you ask. And so we wanted to try to clarify that to make sure that there wouldn't have that into the future. So now we put that under an exemption as outdoor lighting facilities. And this is a discussion we'll be having also later on, is this final clause in here. Something that has been discussed, I think, with previous CUPs as well and other things, is timing and shutting off lights and making sure that we're being just conscientious about light, especially into the night. Here, that they'll be shut off within 60 minutes of final activity. So that the idea with the final activity language is that it's not locking in a certain time. And so if an athletic facility is being used for example, a special event and it's later at night, the lights can be used. If it's not being used, then the idea of lights being shut off. So that was one of the things we added since the previous meeting. So going into the actual standards, we kind of broke this up into essentially 4 areas. First of all is residential. Here, the Planning Commission stuck with the 13 feet for the residential areas. I think it was a lot of consensus that most people were amenable that 13 feet as a base, or kind of that base max height in a residential area, seemed reasonable. In here, we do have a clause under 2A that states if the bulb light source is fully recessed and or shielded from view by an observer at 5 feet above grade at the nearest property line, an increase in light source height to maximum of 20 feet may be allowed. The purpose of this is if for some reason someone has a concern about the 13 feet, trucks or something like that in that residential area, they have that opportunity to go a little higher if they are agreed to have it fully recessed and shielded per the requirement here. It must also meet any photometric requirements as well. And then what the Planning Commission discussed was that this is something that can be done on a staff level and does not need a CUP. So we've pretty much taken the CUP requirement out of lighting. So that's, and then again, 90-degree cutoffs on all lighting as well. That's a addition to the residential. We had that in before. It's just something that wasn't in the residential. Moving into our business and industrial districts, we broke this up. Well, the biggest comment we heard before was that kind of the one size fits all, and so we try to adjust that. So first of all, we broke it down into our B1 and B2 districts. We did that because these are our neighborhood kind of business districts. So with these districts are generally interacting very closely with residential areas. So again, so we kept the height requirement there at 13 feet, but with, again, that clause that if it's shielded and recessed, you may again still go up to 20 feet, and that'll be kind of through staff review there. So there's still that opportunity to go higher. And again, also in B1, B2, you're going to have lighter uses for businesses here as well. Attorneys' offices, real estate agents, hairstylists, and no major business uses should be in a B1 or B2 district. Kind of going into our bigger main commercial districts, B3, B4, B5, B6. These are our, B3 is our central business or downtown, B4 is our general commercial, B5 is our amusement district, and B6 is our Washington Street corridor. Here, we were again addressing that this is again more commercial, so we're giving a little higher of a base height of 15 feet here. I know some of the concern was trucks were roughly about 13 and a half feet, so it does give you some clearance. Again, we have that clause that allows, if you have, again, more guarding of the light, direction of the light, you can now go up to 25 feet through staff review. So again, it gets you a little higher. Finally, we have our I-1, I-2 districts. These are our industrial districts. Again, recognizing these are industrial purposes, you have a base height of 25 feet. And then with our clause of shielding upon staff review, then you can go to the full 30. Finally, the thing we added at discussion at the workshop is something that was in that exemption is light sources in parking lots should be shut off within 60 minutes of final activity. This again is directed at lighting within parking lots, specifically for parking lots, not lights on buildings, not lights, security lighting, but specifically parking lot lighting. Again, to just be respectful with light, especially in the evenings, that within 60 minutes of final activity, those should be shut off. Again, we want to talk about final activity here. So if you're a business, for example, downtown business, if a restaurant or a bar and you're open until midnight, and you want to make sure your staff can leave in the light, this covers that, final activities until your staff leave, that'd be final activity. If you are a business that runs 24/7, such as Cub, your light's going to stay on because your activity never ends. So it addresses those situations, again, gives flexibility, so should an event be going on, the lights can stay on. In addition, we talked about the school district before, we talked about the high school. If the football team doesn't get back until 1 a.m., the lights stay on until 2, until they get back, can put their stuff away, then can get on their cars and go home. So it allows that. We decided that doing that kind of time window was just too restrictive and didn't allow for those situations where they might need to be on later, and some days they can be shut off earlier. So we wanted to have that flexibility, and that's kind of what the commission came up with.
Very good. Since we came up with the ordinance, I don't know if we should have questions, but Justin, perhaps,
Yeah.
Justin might have a question.
Thank you. Sorry I wasn't able to attend the workshop. Just a question maybe on semantics. So we have the language that says the maximum height may be allowed or may be increased. Is that kind of subjective? Should it be is allowed?
The reason I think we said with maybe is because the idea here is still requires staff review. So as long as it's still, maybe is you still got to be fully recessed and shielded. Obviously, you still need to make sure that you're meeting the photometric plan. So you can go up to 25. What we don't want to say, I think the maybe I want to keep that in there, is because someone say, well, it's fully recessed and shielded, but now if they're photometric and now they're not meeting the photometric standards, we want to be able to say, well, you can't go that high because you're not meeting the photometric standards by going that high. So we want to make sure it's not just those two requirements.
Okay.
You got to make sure you still meet the entire photometric code. We just weren't trying to address the whole photometrics with this revision. We're looking at purely the height.
Okay, and then number 7, light sources and parking lots shall be shut off within 60 minutes of final activity. Is this going to apply to all lights or just new lights? Because there may be an argument there for pre-existing lights.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be one for the attorney. But what is going to be the interpretation on that? Is that going to be apply to all lights as soon as this is adopted?
And that was a discussion we had at the workshop. And the assumption I think here was originally would be all lights. I understand where you're coming from, that not all necessary lights are actually, and it did get brought up to me by another staff member after we had this meeting was, well, what about, that's assuming they have an easy shut off.
Yeah, that's.
So that I think maybe would be an element of discussion for the commission is, do you want to have a clause in there that says existing is exempt, or there's a certain amount of, you have a certain amount. Another option would be there's essentially a date. By a certain date, you need to have such software or the ability to turn them off in place, give them a year or 2 years. Understanding that there might be some older lights out there that people just can't easily hit a switch and turn them off.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
For one, I think new would be in there, but is there a way that we can say that if you are going to be updating your lightings, it needs to follow our ordinance?
I think part of that would be, if that's in here, we'll kind of go back into the non-conforming clause. I think that assumption would take place. If you're going to be touching your lighting, then it would need to conform with this. I think to Commissioner Bursley's comment, maybe there should be some clarification on, does the commission intend this to be enacted immediately? Or is there going to be kind of some grace period for existing lighting indefinitely to a certain extent? That would be probably a good discussion for the commission to have.
Other questions?
Do we have the discussion now, or?
Well, we could do the public hearing, but it seems like we're kind of clarifying. This is kind of good clarifying
I
amongst ourselves exactly where we're meeting on this. We could certainly come back to this after a public hearing.
It's, well, for I would say, I assumed that we were going to do every, was immediately, but I think what Justin said, I think any new, if they have the capability of doing that now and not using that capability, it should be required. And if they are going to be working on their lighting, then it needs to be updated to the present code. For lighting sources, not our heights, but I guess that, yeah.
And we may have wanted to find what working on the lights is a change.
I know that.
And that thing, I think, I'm really glad that Commissioner Bursley brought that up, because when you talk about able to, I think everyone has the ability to, but maybe they might not necessarily have a switch. They might actually have to go to like a breaker box and turn them off. Do we want them able to have to go to their breaker box and turn off their lights? I don't know. Again, I'm not a lighting expert when it comes to parking lot lights.
Okay.
And how they turn on and off.
This is obviously a point we'll need to revisit. Let's go ahead and let's get a public hearing, and we'll do this, and then we'll come back. So I'm going to open a public hearing at 7:51, and like to invite anybody who would like to comment, please.
Oh, good. So wait, somebody would do that.
Commissioners, good evening. Reed TC, Director of Buildings and Grounds, Brainerd Public Schools. Just in my email with David yesterday and reviewing this proposed ordinance change, there's a few comments that I'd like to make, and I haven't had enough time yet to completely digest all the information in here. A lot of the comments that were made at the previous planning commissions and city council meetings, there were a lot of comments made regarding the heights of the lights in those areas. One of the initial reactions I had is that with Brainerd High School being in residential 1, most of it being in residential 1, we would fall under some of the most restrictive lighting requirements that there are in the city here. So, that's maybe another conversation that we come back as a zoning request on that one. But overall, looking at this, I'm okay with the language here, but the 60 minutes of final activity, I think that needs to be looked at a little bit more in depth. I can see instances where we would have events going on, say a football game, and are you considering the football game the final activity, and when the final, clock ticks down, we still have students that are in the building changing, showering, getting to their vehicles. That may be longer than 60 minutes. So I don't know that a 60-minute timeline is an appropriate timeline. And how do we manage that when all of these events are at multiple times different throughout the night? We may have students that are returning from an out-of-town game in Moorhead versus an out-of-town game in St. Cloud. They're returning at different times. So now we're constantly having to change that time clock or that computerized system to manage that, or even have somebody there manning those lights just for those times on which those students and staff are returning to our campus. So just a little bit of initial reaction is I'm concerned about that 60-minute criteria. Also being completely shut off, I have a little bit of a concern about district property being in those parking lots with vehicles and whatnot, and having no lighting in those parking lots from a security standpoint. We do have a lot of buses and a lot of buildings that are in parking lots. and that, you know, they do have some side lighting on them, some awning lights and other pole lights throughout the building, but, you know, we will have areas where we are going to have fleet vehicles, and if we have to go down to zero, now when our security cameras are looking at those vehicles, we have no visibility other than going to infrared cameras, and even then your image that you're getting on those cameras is very minimal. So I liked this conversation that was had before, potentially about dimming that light. I know that was a conversation at one point at the commission level here, so maybe that could be entertained at some level as well. That's all I have for you thus far.
Question for you, what would an alternative be for the 60 minutes? What 60 Minutes Act, what alternative would you like to see?
I guess I would like to check with our activities department. They're the ones that are mainly coming in after hours. We do have staff that are in the buildings after hours. You know, we'll have custodians we have 3 shifts of custodians that clean day shift, evening shift, and then from the evening overnight into the morning. And so, you know, we have those staff that are in the buildings, and I don't know exactly where they all park right now because they're coming in at different hours throughout the night. But, you know, would you consider that last activity, or would you consider that an occupied building then when we have staff in the building?
All right.
So, to answer your question, I don't know what the right timeline is there. I think it would be prudent for me to go back and check with some of our staffs who have more information than I do.
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
I do have a
please.
question. You said you have some fleet vehicles?
Mm-hmm.
Now, are they by the building, or are they away from the building?
They can be in many different locations. We have some in the parking lots on the south side of our campus here. We'll have some in South Campus. We'll have some in the lower lots. So we have them throughout all of our schools.
If they're not, why are they there if they're not? I mean, is that where they're parked overnight?
The fleet vehicles?
Yeah.
They're there depending upon where they're being used and who has it next day and things like that, so.
So they're not, I guess my question, where do you park them at the end of your day?
I would have to we'd have to look at specific vehicles and specific groups of use. I don't know, Lane, do you have?
Well, some of them are.
Come on.
Come on up.
Hello, I wasn't planning to talk. Lane Larson, Superintendent of Schools. The fleet vehicles that we have, many of them are stored at South Campus. Some of them are stored just in the parking lots or whatever, waiting to be used in the morning as well. My concern really has to do with the 60 minutes that Reed just spoke about. Who's going to be there to determine when that time is over, and then what the 60 minutes is, and who's going to be there to make sure that the lights are off. And if people are blowing snow or whatever, or we have a snowstorm and they're getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, how are we going to know that the lights are on so that they're safe as well? As you know, we had a major safety concern at our high school in February this past year. And how are we going to ensure the safety of our students and our staff within the school if there aren't lights around? You know, to me, the purpose of lights is to provide safety and security for everyone. And I get really concerned if we're going to go full black and still have parking lots and school district property, and we're responsible. And so just something I'd like us to think about before this ordinance is approved. But thank you. And I would like to reiterate as well, the school district really would like to thank you for working with us as well on these conditional use permits and all the work that we've been doing to make this community just an incredible place to educate our children. And so thank you for the partnership that we've had in this process. So thank you.
I think that Jan has a question for you.
I do, I guess, maybe clarification. Now, building security, we're not talking about shutting lights off at the building security. Is that a concern? Is that the concern, or are you just talking about the parking lot?
No, I think, I'm thinking about both, really, because ultimately the school district is responsible for any property in which we own, which includes the parking lots. And I do get very concerned about having a parking lot black, having people walk through the parking lot or whatever. Should there be somebody that isn't supposed to be there, just to ensure the safety and security when they're on our school property. And so I really think that 60 minutes is something we need at least to have further conversation and to see how we might be able to accommodate the concerns. I understand the light pollution and things like that, and also to ensure the safety and security of all of our community. So I think just further discussion would be good.
May I have another question?
Ms. Lambert has one more?
So how would you feel if we did instead of going black, we would say that it needs to be reduced to 75% after 60 minutes of the final activity?
I'd be a lot happier with that. And I know Reed and I spoke about that just a little bit while we were sitting there, that even if it was dimmed, that would help at least. You could see if there were shadows or see if, just to make sure that there's some lighting there to ensure the safety when people are walking through the properties.
Very good. Any other questions for the school staff?
I will ask one
Please,
more.
Jan.
I'm sorry.
I didn't move from the mic that time. Yeah.
The other thing too, if we were to do that, reduce it, would it be easier to program the lighting? What your concern was about?
One of the things that I think about with that, sure, we can program it or whatever, but many times, I've been a superintendent for 14 years. And many times, particularly in the middle of the winter, we'll think that the buses are to arrive from a sporting event or some kind of an event, and they're due to come home at 12:30 or whatever, and they'll get into icy roads, or something will happen, or the bus will get a flat tire, or something like that, and the buses don't arrive at the time that's indicated. And, that's what, if we program it, then it's going to be dark, or it's going to be black when they do get home. And again, that isn't meeting that safety and security need that we addressed.
But I was talking about if we reduced it to like a 75%, so there's still going to be lighting.
Absolutely, that'd be better.
Yeah, I think so too, but at the same token, when we are returning home from those events, these are school buses and there could be multiple that are coming back, and you're going to have those students milling around, and there'll be parents waiting in that parking lot for their kids to get there. I understand the want for reduction. I completely understand that. I just think that in our situation as the school district, elementary schools would be much easier to program and do that reduction at, because after I should just look at Lane, all our principals left, sorry. After 8, 9 o'clock at night, those elementary schools pretty much are unoccupied. So I could see every residential elementary school going down to a 50% light level, and even in those instances, those parking lots are across the road, but I could see a reduced light level in those instances, Commissioner or Councilmember Lambert. At our high school, it really is unique because we do have so many different events and at so many different times. And so I'm just really struggling with that timing of that and how we have people manage that. I'm really grasping. Yes, please do.
Another thing that I was just thinking as I was standing there with the Regional Performing Arts Center, there's going to be different challenges that we're going to be faced with, because there's going to be many activities that'll be going on at our school that probably will be out of the hands of the school, and yet it's on school property. And so we aren't going to necessarily have control of what time those events are done and what time the people leave from those events. And so when I kind of think about it, and I'm not saying 24 hours necessarily for the school, but the high school might be just one of those outliers, similar to what you were talking about with Cub Foods. If they're open for 24 hours a day, the lights probably are going to be on the whole time. Well, the high school performing arts, that might be one of those outliers that we need to look at separately, because it really, it is run differently than any of our other facilities that we have within our community.
Thank you for taking
Yeah,
time.
thank you.
Excellent.
Well, good evening. Tim Ramworth with WSN, here on behalf of ISD 181 and the Brainerd Chamber Government Affairs Committee. I too want to echo thank you for the process that you guys have taken on this ordinance revision. We appreciate that. It appears that you've listened to the concerns that were raised and you've made a great first attempt. This is the first time I've taken a look at it today, so what I'd like to do is take it back to our Government Affairs Committee, review this to see if we have any concerns, but I'll just echo a few that the school district has brought up. I think from a business standpoint, it's going to be very difficult sell to say that we want to have all the parking lot lights reduced after the store hours. You've got yards and other things like that, and one of the reasons we have lights is for reduced vandalism, safety, security. So to have those parking lots go dark at night, I just don't think that's a reality. I think it might be realistic to look at a 50% reduction like we had talked about, you know, in the CUPs with the high school and Harrison. That's something that I think this planning commission should look at. Again, I think that's going to be a hard sell with our business communities. Now, with regard to the high school, we do have the CUP that was approved for the 23-foot pole height. As we had discussed, we were concerned that any kind of lighting ordinance that comes forward, how would that affect that CUP? Because we know that those lights aren't going to be installed immediately this year. There might be some that are installed 3 years down the road. So does that CUP stand, or is that negated with an ordinance as passed, as revised?
Stand.
It stands.
It would stand?
Mhm.
Okay.
As long as well, I'll let you answer.
I see it as it stands, again, as long as you're not necessarily deviating from what was approved.
Right, and in that particular instance, it was 23-foot pole height, so it wouldn't be consistent with the ordinance as you have it
Yeah,
proposed.
I think there's a provision in the ordinance that says you have to act upon the CUP within like 2 years. So as long as you
Yeah.
apply for the permits, you said it might take 3 years to install some of the lights?
Well, potentially, some of those could be in 2022, couldn't they? Yeah.
Which one, are you referring to the north?
The high school. Well,
But that's a B4 zone. That north parking lot's B4.
but the east parking lot. Yeah, because that's going to be the very last one across Fifth Street.
And that's something also with the conditional use permits, is anytime with that, if, for example, were to somehow fall outside of that clause that says it must be acted on upon a certain time period, that's when that eligible will always come back and.
We can get an amendment, can't we?
Get an amendment to an extension.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
approved. Yep.
Okay. But in keeping with that same line of reasoning, then, you know, I think what we had agreed to at the high school is we know that our kids travel long distances, and so they may not get back until the parking lots until like 1 or 2 a.m. And I think what we agreed to in the CUP is that when all the kids had been returned and they left the school, then the lighting would be reduced at a 50% level. And I think that's probably going to have to be all manual. I don't think you can do that electronically.
Can't do it electronically, how do they know the timing of when?
Right.
We never have a system that can detect that.
Right, so that's one thing that we would ask for consideration on as well, is because when those kids are coming back, it's not necessarily associated with an activity that takes place at our school. It's far away. But those kids won't be back until, you know, the wee hours of the morning, and we want to make sure that it's well lit and it's secure and safe. So just some other things for you to consider as you move forward. But again, I think you're making great strides. We just, I think, have a few more concerns we'd like to maybe see addressed, so thank you.
Mr. Chair.
We have another question from,
I just want to make a comment, you know, and thank you for everything, but you have to understand, we had times, it was like midnight, or 11 o'clock to 2, and then everything had to shut down. So that's why we went to the minutes. So I think we just need to probably clean that up a little bit or come up with something. But just to let you know that we wanted to make it a little bit easier to deal with, and having a 4-hour period, that's all you had, so.
All right, and this will be difficult to administer. We understand that too, so thank you.
Thank you.
If I may.
Well, let's
Okay.
see if we have any of our public hearing. Anybody else for the public hearing? All right. I will close our public hearing at 8:08. Yes.
In response to some of the concerns, the verbiage that we put in on number 7 was parking lots. Lots that were specifically for parking, not an extension of a sales premise like a car dealership or lumber yard would be. There, it would be considered security lighting and not parking lot lighting. So that would alleviate most of those concerns. It would be specifically areas only designated for parking. In response to some of the other concerns about child safety, I would like to suggest that perhaps we talk about making a child safety clause in addition to number 7, and we make an exemption for schools and childcare facilities that would allow them to use their discretion and would hopefully, in good faith, they would shut off the lights or reduce them to an acceptable level for the residential areas. But the child safety clause would allow everybody to know what their area is, what their crime level is, and what is necessary. And it would leave that up to the schools
The facilities.
and the
that have that.
facilities to make sure that the kids are safe coming and going.
All right. Point taken. Other comments? Just a general comment to make is that we have to remember that all these facilities still will be lit by street lights that are never being turned off, and they'll still be lit by building lights, which will never be turned off. So we're not looking at a totally dark option, so I just want to kind of clarify that. What's the consensus here? Do we feel like we need a little more work on this, or do we feel like we can make a few changes tonight? What are the consensus on this? I mean, if
Well, can we
somebody's-
just-
Go ahead.
Well, I guess I'd like to hear from Justin.
I echo the commission. I think the school use is a different use than any other sort of use, so I think there should be some special provisions for that, although I'm not sure that we can legally incorporate that into the ordinance, other than saying, you have to follow this, other than authorized by conditional use permit or something like that. We can incorporate it into their CUP. But yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's certainly a different sort of use, and I understand the security concerns with it. I don't know, those aren't very good thoughts, but that's where I'm at with it.
Would,
Yes.
Mr. Chair?
Final activity is kind of loose language
Yeah.
for the owner to maybe define on their own as well, as I see it.
Okay.
I think we could tighten that up a little bit, yeah. I think having a time and then saying, or authorized by conditional use permit or something like that.
Would we be comfortable tonight if we gave staff some direction on what we'd like to?
I would prefer to see, David, if you might be able to incorporate some of the thoughts and comments here in nuanced considerations that we heard from the input from the public.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
I think I
please.
would definitely be more comfortable. I can go in and taking some of those comments, try to look at maybe if there's anything else out there regarding this. I know we did pull this idea from another ordinance. Maybe they have some nuance in there as well. And then bring it back to the commission. I'd be much more comfortable bringing it back to the commission to review before sending it to council. So
I think that'd be a smart strategy.
instead of voting on it to send to council with.
I think that's a smart strategy.
I think I'd rather, from where I sit, get this right than rush it.
Yep.
And Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
Would there, I guess the other thought would too is perhaps we could word it in our exception clause for issues like what Teresa talked about.
I can come up with a couple different options.
Yes, okay.
So, to figure out what would work the best.
Do we need a motion to table this on, or can we just go with a
Just get a
consensus?
direction to staff, couldn't we just do a
All
direction
right,
to
very
staff?
good, very good. All right.
Okay.
That leads us to 6B. We're looking, the non-conforming rental issue has been sent kickback in our direction from the city council. And I'm going to let David maybe tell us a little bit about what the background might be.
Yep. But first, I'm going to hand this off really quick.
Okay.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Okay, so this goes back to our non-conforming rental discussion. The Planning Commission, back in October, proposed an ordinance revision that's completely struck section 515-15-6 point B, that said in a non-conforming rental that had a license expired, that license could not be renewed. Pretty much said it's done. And so in the desire to try to alleviate situations where we had existing multifamily structures. For whatever reason, a license had expired or been lost, that now that's just pretty much, it just sits there. And with the other purpose of trying to potentially bring other rentals into compliance because they don't have licenses and yet are renting them anyway. We decided that this was probably the easiest way to do that by striking it without incurring new multifamily properties, specifically in single-family residential areas. So this went before the City Council on October 16th. At that meeting, there were concerns from the City Council that this revision was too broad and thus opened the door for properties that were once multifamily but haven't been for many years, not just ones currently operating, to suddenly become multifamily again. You know, it was a duplex. The second structure actually had a call from someone earlier this week, kind of in a similar type situation, not 100% a single, but whereas a duplex, set up a duplex, the second structure hasn't been used as a rental for a long time, but it's still technically set up as one. You know, hasn't been used that way for 40 years. Does this mean they get their license back? So that was some concerns the council had. A motion was made to adopt the ordinance. It did not receive a second, and therefore the item failed. So the purpose I put this on the agenda is just kind of bring it back, and just kind of the discussion is, does the commission want to do anything moving forward? Do they just want to leave it for now and address it later through actual ordinance revisions like we discussed earlier? Maybe changing the R1 language entirely. If we did that, we wouldn't have to deal with this. Do we want to go that route? Do we want to try to change something else? Do they want to do anything at all?
All right, discussion? Questions?
Mr. Chair,
Please.
I'd like to go back to what Justin said, go through the ordinance process. I know we're going through this on a subcommittee with rental licenses and such. So I think it would be better to do it like Justin had mentioned earlier, go through the ordinance revisions.
All right. Reactions, questions?
I'm not sure that I followed your point, Commissioner.
What, because just you were mentioned that we're going to, or you guys had mentioned that we're going to we're looking at our residential code where this would be addressed, correct? Am I wrong? Or?
The portion I had suggested we look at was regarding duplexes in the R1 zone and allowing that sort of use. I think this is related, but not completely identical. It's sort of related, but I think this deals with triplexes and fourplexes as well, not just duplexes. So it's a
Okay, I
broader.
hear what you're saying. I'm sorry.
I believe Commissioner Bursley's original comment in our previous item was speaking specifically to duplexes in a single family.
Okay.
Obviously, that would be changing the ordinance, the R1 ordinance that would be going through. You know, obviously, a similar process that we're going through now
Okay.
with lighting, where we'd be looking at wording and such, and public hearings and things like that before we got there. If you did just duplexes, because the purpose and intent of an R1 does speak about two-family homes, I think it would alleviate some of it. But again, some of it, especially when you look at those predominantly single-family areas in like North Brainerd and Northeast Brainerd, there are some triplexes and fourplexes, maybe even a few other bigger ones that, again, that change still wouldn't cover them.
Are there a lot of those out there? Maybe Rick would have more on that, but I can't imagine there's that many that actually aren't used as three triplexes, quads.
Well, I think it's a non-conforming that we.
Yeah.
Come on up.
Sure.
Rick Fargo, 7102 Ojibwe Road, no longer a Brainerd resident, but still involved. And as David and Jan and I spent an hour and a half again this morning on the rental housing maintenance code revisions that we've been working on for going on a year now, Jan, we're coming up with a lot of these issues. And just as a quick example, it's not just an R1 district that we're concerned about, because you could have an unlicensed dwelling unit within a 5-plex or a 24-plex unit building where the owner of that building is living in that, and by our current ordinance does not require that unit to be licensed. We're looking at some changes that will help clear up some of those things. But another example in what we're really trying to do with this, I hope, with this trying to get things cleared up here, is to get all of the rental properties out there acknowledged by the city of Brainerd and by the owners to say, yeah, I got to follow these things. I was going to make a comment during Mr. Kramer's discussion here, because the way I heard him describe the house on North Fourth there is that it should have been licensed because it is not in one of our exemptions. And my understanding from what he said was that his brother owns the property, but his daughter is living in it. That is not a legal exemption under our ordinance. So I sat back and shut up, I'm sorry.
Whose daughter, the owner or the guy that?
No,
came up?
Jeff's
There's
daughter.
some confusion.
Yeah.
I had my own on that whole,
Okay, I'm
who was the
sorry.
applicant and who was the
Yeah.
property owner.
And again, but that, a perfect example of, people don't want to come out there and admit that. How many mother-in-law apartments or sections are there of houses? How many people have a roomer living in there, one of their basement bedroom or whatever else? Those are the things we want to find out with this ordinance and with our rental housing maintenance code also. So I think you're going to have to take a broader look and do some digging into this and not, I think, yeah, it was a great idea to get rid of that clause or whatever, that, make the simple way. But realistically, the more I thought about it, unfortunately, Gabe's probably right. Don't tell him I said that, but,
You just did.
Oh, you didn't get that, did you? They fell asleep, don't worry. But I think that's what we want to do is identify these rental properties out there. And I don't want to hear stuff like I heard from the North Side folks tonight, that, yeah, they have a problem there, and, it needs to be cleaned up, whether it's owner-occupied or rental, okay? And rental, you have more strength, as Jan brought out and David attested to. If the property was listed as a rental and was licensed as a rental and did not have a qualified exemption in there, we would license it and therefore go and inspect it in full inspection, inside and the full exterior, not just what you can see from the street or the right-of-way. So those are all things that I think need to be thought about and worked on more to get these issues cleared up. So.
Thank you. Any questions for Rick?
I just one.
Yes.
Mr. Chair. So Rick, it sounds like the council's concern was there might be a lot of triplexes, fourplexes out there that aren't currently being, each individual unit is not being rented out. Maybe there's one person living there, and if we remove this language, they're all of a sudden going to be able to, rent all of these units. Do you think there's a lot of vacant spaces in these triplexes and fourplexes out there?
We know
Rented illegally?
We know there are a lot of, maybe 50 rental units out there that are not licensed. Rough guess.
Yeah.
Just based on the census numbers and stuff. But David, go ahead.
Sure. I'll use an example. I did get a call, I think it was this past week or last week, about talking about a similar situation. This wasn't a B1 zone, but kind of similar situation where someone's just calling. It was parents owned this property. It originally was a single family house. It was a duplex. The parents they haven't rented the second floor in many, probably a decade or so, and they've pretty much just, no one's living up there. They've just kind of shut it off, and they've only living on the first floor. Hasn't had a rental license. Parents are now in a home, and the kids are wondering, probably looking to sell the property, but what can we do with it? And so it's that kind of situation where it's been existing, hasn't been being used, but is set up that way. And now we're looking at the code, and I kind of had the answer was, well, under the B1 code, it says single family. Mm-hmm. And it hasn't been licensed for many, many years. It was licensed at one point, from what I can understand. And so now it's kind of that situation of it's still even out, Planning Commission kind of determined a couple months ago that if it had never had a license, that clause didn't, kind of looked at the gray area that said the clause didn't count because no license expired.
Right.
But in this situation, it had one a long time ago. And so, again, now we're kind of in the situation of what do we do with this You know, do I tell them that tough, you know?
Mr. Chair.
Please,
I
yeah.
think the example that kind of brought this all to the head was out in North Brainerd where it was a fiveplex, but one of the apartments were rented to a family member, which does not need to be licensed. So 4 of them were licensed and 1 was not. And our ordinance said if it's been 365 days, it's.
And that one I was able to
Yeah,
actually
no, you were
address
able
that
to, but
one, but
that-
there, I know Mr. Fargo can attest
But I
that
mean,
there are others like that one that do exist.
But that's what brought it to us, you know, and so that's why we're looking at saying to strike that. And the city council had brought up the fact that, well, like 10 years ago, my mother-in-law rented out. So does that mean she can now go back and rent it and make it a rental and be able to get a license without that clause? So I think we do need to get we need to fix that a little bit. We should have thought of putting a time limit, how long it would be without a.
Why?
Huh?
Why?
Why what, the time?
Why put a time limit on whether or not you can rent it or not? I
No,
don't,
I mean, you're saying that
if it's sitting vacant for a while, or it's been rented to a family member for 5 years or 10 years, why can it not be a licensed rental down the road when that family member moves out or when you decide to use it again?
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
fine, but what happens if the scenario that was given, it was a duplex, and somebody rented it, and they never rented it, it was just kind of held as a single family. So now 30 years later, she can come back and get a license. She could use it as a rental
Yeah.
without, you know.
So what's the problem with that?
I hate to say it, but I kind of would have to agree with Mr. Fargo's perspective here.
Yeah, I guess so.
I think it comes down to
Yeah.
how do we determine whether a use is discontinued? So if you have a duplex,
Yeah.
Yeah,
you have 2 families living in it, 1 family moves out for 30 years. The duplex still sits there, it's still a duplex. The use, in my opinion, I think it comes down to a legal question. I don't think the use has been discontinued. It's been there, it's been vacant, but it still has the kitchen and the bathroom, and it's
So the
sitting
thing-
empty.
2 utilities.
Utilities,
But
so
that's
it's
a
2 separate units, and in my opinion, that should allow,
And I think that's really what's come down to, and I think that's where maybe there's been some disagreement between this commission and the council is what's that separation, or how do they interact between the use, single family, multifamily, you know, versus the setup of the structure? And how do we get those two things to jive? And I think the council's saying, sure, it might be set up as a duplex, I think, but their translation of use is, well, no one is living in it, so now the use has changed back to single family, versus I think from what we've been gathering from this
so you've heard-
commission
okay.
is,
It's
it's still set up
the
as a
physical
duplex.
setup,
The
yeah.
physical duplex the physical structure is a duplex, so therefore the use is
Yeah, if it walks like a
multifamily.
duplex.
Yeah.
Yeah,
quacks
I
like a
think we
duplex.
talked about that too, where if they came in and knocked out the center wall and turned it into a single family, well, clearly
Yeah.
the use has been discontinued. Now it's a single family home, and they can't reestablish the duplex.
Right,
But if it's
right.
always been 2 separate units, it's 2 separate units.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay,
I
okay.
agree. I'm sorry, I agree
And
on
that's
that.
where
I
I
can't
think-
remember what Gabe said.
And that's where I think kind of one reason I brought it in, because I don't expect us to handle it tonight. I just want to make sure, like, is this a route? Does the commission still want staff to keep pursuing this? Obviously, it might take a little longer. And 2, to try to reconcile, I think, those differences, and how do we reconcile that difference between how this commission reads the ordinance
And the city
versus how the council,
Yeah.
and try to get those things to reconcile.
Can you run that example by them, where if you have the pre-existing use and whether or not a use is discontinued? Like if you have a duplex and you convert it to a single family, you can't reestablish the duplex. It's done.
And we can try to do that, and I think what
Yeah, I
what
think-
Commissioner
yeah, I
Lambert
think-
kind of brought up, that was Councilmember Johnson. He was talking about how his grandma had the house that was a duplex, and then they stopped using it as a duplex.
Like literally, like reconfigured it?
To that, I
He didn't say.
He didn't say. I think he made some comment there was still maybe a second kitchen. Now, if he reconfigured it so it no longer met the rental housing code and things like that about entrances and all those kind of things, well then, I would say,
But if it was a duplex and it still had the kitchen set, if they used that, if like his grandma used it as a part of their living facility, that ceases to be then it becomes a single
and that's where,
family.
for example, I used the example of the call I got just last week is, I actually went to clarify, and they said pretty much that that upstairs unit has just been sealed off. Like, nothing's been done with it. The grandparents or the parents were just living downstairs. So it still is separated physically.
I would be comfortable with asking staff to continue to pursue this. I think we need to figure out it's communication. That's where our issue is at this point. Is figuring out how to communicate this better. Because I think if council understands our perspective and what we're looking at for use, I think they'll come around. So, to me, it probably makes more sense to be a little more careful with our language, figure out a better way of communicating this, as opposed to just sending it right back. I don't think that's obviously going to be productive. And I don't want to let it go completely, because I think it's a good point to say we need to get these rentals. You're better off having them as a legal rental than having them as an illegal rental.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would even volunteer to help staff.
And I don't,
Thanks.
and David,
I guess.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Dave, I don't think this is going to be anything that's going to be in our will not come into our
No,
subcommittee.
no, this is something that we'll just handle internally and staff-wise.
Okay.
Cool. Because I don't want any more.
All right. Are we good on 6B? If we are good on 6B, let's move to 7. Commissioner questions and comments. Any? Just a general question. I know last year we didn't have a December meeting, and we kind of did a little kind of talk instead. What is do you think we're going to have an agenda for December at this point? What do you think?
At this point, I do anticipate that we will have an agenda for
Okay,
December.
very good. Very good. Excellent.
So with that in mind, that would make our December meeting being Wednesday, December 18th.
Okay.
So the 1 week before Christmas. And then again,
The third Wednesday?
that'll be the third Wednesday.
Okay, very good. Very good.
If I'm counting correctly, yes.
Yep.
Third Wednesday, December 18th.
All right.
If for some reason these items that I'm anticipating don't come in, I might communicate with the chair and the vice chair, and then maybe, depending on that, we might call it, but I think we should plan on having a meeting on the 18th.
Okay, that sounds like a good plan moving forward. This kind of segue right into unless there's any other commissioner questions or comment, let's segue right into number 8. Anything else you have, David?
The only thing that I want to add, just publicly, I want to, officially last night, the city council did select a new city administrator, so I do want to congratulate Jennifer Bergman, who will
very
be
good.
stepping in the near future as our new city administrator.
All right. Very
That's
good.
all I have.
All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
I hear a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. There we go.
Are we on?
And I'm kind of hoping that maybe I should have put that in the form of a motion, was to have
Are we on?
Mr. Marone bring plate of cookies again.
Plate of
Yes.
cookies. I would, Commissioner Duval,
you have
consider
seconded
bringing
that?
a growler of beer, but we may be in trouble with our landlords here.
Yeah.
Mike, I just figured out what these buttons are. That's a mute button.
Was it on or off?